Hi friends, if you like watching my videos, then be sure to subscribe to the channel, put a like, and do not forget to click on the bell. Enjoy watching! The action begins to unfold in a richly decorated house. In the dining room, on the table, is a lot of appetizing dishes and drinks for every, even the most fastidious taste. Eleanor Schuberg, the head of the Schuberg family, part-time count, was sitting and studying some documents, while he asked Irina, who was also sitting at this table, to eat tightly. When the girl didn't react to his remark, he asked her what she was going to do that day. But even now she was in no hurry to answer. Nevertheless, the girl put aside her knife and fork. The steak in front of her remained untouched, wiped her mouth with a napkin, and looked at the man opposite. She was of noble birth, but her family had gone bankrupt, and she was left with nothing. So, whether she wanted to answer or not, she had no choice. So she said that the first thing she was going to do was to learn how to garden, and then, if there was time, she would do the laundry and other chores around the house. Eleanor asked Irina not to overdo it in her gardening lessons, and to be careful not to hurt herself in the process. He also advised her to ask the maid to prepare a wide-brimmed hat for her. This man's behaviour did not inspire enthusiasm in the girl, and she phlegmatically agreed with his words. The master of the house, after his speech, was silent and sipped some tea. Irina realized that he was not just a handsome and noble aristocrat, but also her creditor, to whom she owed a tidy sum of money. But after a minute, he stopped to drink tea and asked the girl if the fact that she would have to use a saw or garden shears in her gardening lessons meant that she would have to use a saw or garden shears. Irina thought for a moment, and then answered that he was probably right, and she would have to use those items, but she didn't understand the point of the question. The man explained that he was afraid that she would mistake someone for a tree and slit their throat by accident. The man explained that he was afraid that she would confuse someone with a tree and slit their throat, and it could be considered an insult or a bad joke. But the problem was that everything she had taken on before had ended badly, so the girl was embarrassed and promised that this time nothing like that would happen, and she would be extremely careful. But then Irina turned the conversation in another direction and told the Count that she was going to marry Ludwig. It did not take long for the man to react. At the same time, behind his back, the maid dropped a cup from her hands. It shattered and spattered everyone with its contents. The girl apologized, but no one even heard her, for Eleanor did not understand how the girl opposite had decided to marry such a windy and not particularly good man as Ludwig. She, on the other hand, was indignant in response, for she had a very different opinion of her lover. But now, the Count decided to explain her situation to her. He said that she was not in his house to work off her enormous debt, because in his opinion, they could not have a normal working relationship. And since that's the case, she has no chance of even trying to change the current situation. With that, he stood up from the table and walked towards her, asking her if he should be even more articulate and voice his thought. Realizing she wasn't getting it, he moved closer, leaned over her, and whispered in her ear that she would never marry anyone but him. Irina was angry because she thought he was trash, but he was not afraid, but kissed her curl and said he would come to her bedroom at night and warned her that she had better not lock the door to her room. But it's worth going back 7 years to see what's what in their very ambiguous relationship. So if you go back 7 years in time, you can see how events begin to unfold at Kisen Academy. At that time, Irina was only 15 years old and attended this educational institution. She had many friends with whom she socialized in one way or another. The friends were indignant and stared at the girl. They didn't understand what she had done that caused the professor to pay such close attention to them. For some reason they were frightened and wanted the man to stop doing that, because the situation was beginning to resemble, in their opinion, a terrible dream from which they could not wake up. That was a wonderful time, for she could afford to be a happy and innocent girl and live a carefree lifestyle. And everything was like that, until one day, Irina and her friends witnessed a very unpleasant scene when a group of guys attacked a dark-haired guy. Their leader pushed the stranger. He fell and dropped the book, but the leader of the attackers began to ask him why he was picking on him again, although from the outside it looked different. One of the girls mentioned that the guy who had fallen was Eleanor, and the attackers were Martin and his gang, and it was obvious that the boys were up to their old tricks. Irina didn't like picking up rumors around the academy. But even she had heard about this and other conflicts. So it was said that Eleanor was the son of Count Schuberg and a concubine who lived outside for a long time, and he accordingly grew up in one of the caves away from people. Now, although he was in the academy, he didn't get close to anyone, he wasn't friends with anyone, and he didn't trust anyone. But even in such a situation, when the boy was attacked by 3 other classmates, he ignored them and did not respond in any way to the provocation. This made the attackers angry. The blonde felt that Eleanor owed him an apology since he had hit him before, but the boy only sighed as he found this conversation burdensome. And the moment Martin wanted to step on his opponent's hand, which he extended to pick up his book, he received a slap, which Irina slapped him. She smiled cheekily and asked the bullies if they were really so cowardly that they attacked one person in 3s. The girl's hand was heavy, so the boy rubbed his cheek, slumped over, and asked why she cared what he was going to do with this man. Was she really so out of her mind to get involved in their boyish squabbles? Irina perceived such wording of the answer as a personal insult, so she calmly asked the young man if he naively believed that she could not insult him in return. And at that moment, her soul raced to heaven. She spewed curses like a volcano spews lava. Her friends were just as surprised as the guys, but they knew their girlfriend had such an explosive temper. But even they got the feeling that they felt the dirt in their ears afterward. And then she crouched down beside the blonde man and asked him about how he must be feeling nasty right now, because she had insulted him like that in front of other people. Irina suggested that if he was familiar with the feeling, he shouldn't have done that to other people, and then added that if he was angry with her, she would let him hit her once. But nothing of the sort followed, and the boys simply ran away. She turned her head to the victim and asked him if he was Eleanor Schuberg. The guy started to get up, and the girl handed him a handkerchief and asked him why he was letting these guys bully him, and yet never giving them a break. But Eleanor neither answered her anything, nor was going to accept the handkerchief, so she put the object into his hands herself, and told him that he was in no way to blame, but even in the event that he might knowingly lose in such a situation, he could do it handsomely. Back then, she didn't see the difference between right and wrong, and that was one of her mistakes. Besides, she did not know or realize at that time how her actions would affect her future life, and how the timid young man who would accept her handkerchief would become this man, Count Schuberg. But at the time she tried to study, but often practically slept through classes and felt relieved when classes were over. It was then, while studying at the academy, that she met a handsome guy who also liked her, and waited often for her classes to end under the classroom window. Every time he appeared in her, it was a storm of emotions. This time was no exception. She opened the window, leaned out halfway, and called the guy's name, ignoring the students or his words that her actions could be dangerous to her health. Ludwig asked her to keep her voice down, as she was disturbing everyone with her shouting, but she objected and said that she could not behave differently, as she had the opportunity to see him every day. They walked holding hands through the alley of the park. The boy didn't understand why she chose to study Elysian, since she sat at the last desk. It seemed to Irina that the professor who taught the language was a kindly man, and she believed that if she even fell asleep in his lessons, he wouldn't say anything to her. But her premonition failed her this time. The couple reached the bench. The guy sat down, and she lay down and put her head in his lap. He wondered what had gone wrong in her plan. She smiled and said that she had made a mistake, and now she realized it. But then Ludwig abruptly changed the subject and talked about Eleanor, which surprised his girlfriend. He noticed her reaction and did not understand her. And Irina said that she was fine and asked what was going on with their fellow student this time. The guy said that their acquaintance had returned to the dormitory he had left for a while, and now he was moving back in after his suspension was over. The girl was silent. It turned out that just recently, Eleanor, who was despised by everyone around him, had been suspended for a week, because on that day, for a reason unknown to everyone, he had been able to fight back against his abusers. There were rumors that it was a one-sided attack, so it was very difficult to prove that he was the victim. The girl felt guilty, for it was she who had told him that it was necessary to stop keeping everything inside and finally fight back against the offenders. But what bothered Ludwig was that she had slapped Earl George's second son on the same day. Irina faltered a little, for she hoped he did not know of her act. But it turned out that he knew about everything, and asked her to temper her ardour. But the girl was indignant, because she thought she had done the right thing, because the bastard had called her crazy. Although the young man did not like the situation, he considered his friend's act justified. Ludwig felt that she could get into trouble from which she would find no way out if she continued to behave in this manner. The girl found her lover's behavior a bit boring, so she decided to change the topic of conversation. So she looked intently at her young man and asked him if he knew that the monarchy had been overthrown in Illis. Ludwig did not immediately understand what she meant and assumed that it was about the change of the king, but Irina denied it, as it was about the fact that the whole system of government of that country had collapsed. The boy didn't understand how this could have happened. Irina said that this information had been given to her by a professor of the Elysian language. She had always wondered whether in such a case discrimination by birth would disappear, but the point was that it would not. The girl looked at her lover and proposed marriage to Illis. He looked surprised, and then asked her about whether the Marquise, her father, would allow them to marry. Irina was sure that her father loved her too much, so he would approve of their union, unable to deny her this request. Meanwhile, time passed, and during one of the breaks between classes, Eleanor came to Irina. She didn't notice him at first, but her friends brought it to her attention that someone had come to her. The guy didn't say a word. He just looked at her, and then when he noticed her looking back at him, he walked further down the hall. She concluded that he wanted her to follow him. At first, they followed each other to the backyard of the academy, but then the girl equaled her mysterious friend and said that she was curious what had happened to his face and legs. She asked him if he was hurt, but when she got no answer, she concluded that he didn't like to talk. But after an all too long pause, the guy said he just fell. Irina was surprised, however, as his voice sounded much nicer than she had expected. The girl asked him to be careful, because if he didn't get hurt in a fight, he should make sure that he doesn't get hurt in other situations. She was also worried about whether he was in pain with that bruise. He reassured her by saying that he was fine. After that, the girl started to look at his bruise and said that the combination of blue and red colours even created some kind of art. Her words caused him to smile, and Irina realised that his smile was very beautiful too, not only his voice. He then took her handkerchief out of his jacket pocket, handed it to the girl, and told her that he had washed it. She couldn't believe that her thing now looked so much better than new, so mouthed that he didn't have to give the item back to her. But to the guy, it was just an excuse to call her out. And when Irina reached out to take his handkerchief, he jerked away his already hand in which he held the object and pressed it against his chest. Hearing that he didn't have to return the handkerchief, he asked a classmate if he could keep it. They both felt a certain awkwardness to the situation, so the girl assumed that he had called her here to thank her for her help in the recent incident. But it wasn't true. The guy wasn't going to thank her for it. Irina felt like a loser at that moment, but she didn't know yet that in a second this guy would surprise her. Eleanor asked her out on a date. The girl was very much surprised, poked her finger at herself and interrogated the guy about whether he really wanted to go out with her. Irina didn't understand how and why he wanted to date her. The answer was simple. He had fallen in love with her. It was all about the fact that Eleanor had been thinking about Irina ever since they had met face to face, for it was she who had first mentioned the honour that he would never begin to think about, and would never think about in the future. After all, she's the one who told him to fight, even if he knows he's going to lose. Irina thought that he was not at all sincere in showing his emotions, so she advised him to say that she was beautiful. And the guy repeated it like a parrot, saying that she was very beautiful. And then Eleanor smiled and said he wanted to date her because she was a very pretty girl. The girl felt something strange when she realised that the very real handsome man was praising her for her beauty. But it didn't matter to her that they didn't know each other before, and maybe she would have even agreed to it, but she already had a boyfriend she loved. Irina asked her new suitor if he knew Ludwig, who was taking the same classes as them, since he was the one she was dating. Eleanor looked away and asked if she was talking about Ludwig Fontaine. The girl didn't like his tone, so she stood up and asked him if he had a problem with that. They stood silent for a while and stared at each other. But then the boy interrupted the silence and said that there was nothing wrong with it. That day was probably the starting point of their relationship, as she constantly felt his invisible presence around her. So a new semester at the academy began, and one day, Eleanor walked into the auditorium where Irana was waiting for the start of class with her friends. His appearance caused a wave of mute questions in the room. Nevertheless, he was not particularly embarrassed, as he was already used to such situations. He took an empty seat next to Irina, which caused her questions, as she did not understand what was going on. She didn't understand what he was doing here, as this was an intermediate-level course in this language, and before, he had never been seen in their classes. Eleanor confessed that although he had not attended these classes before, he wanted to try his hand at the subject once. At that moment, the girl realized that her desk mate was a very strange young man. But besides being odd, Eleanor also had an innate elegance. He was graceful on a walk, and when, just like that, he sat next to her at her desk, he was very handsome, and behind his soft smile there was a rebelliousness. And also, even though he seemed like a polite little guy to most people, he actually threw contemptuous glances at them. Irina thought that perhaps the reason for such mood swings and contrasts in behavior was due to his very sad and ambiguous past. And then the girl realized that she was judging and condemning his behavior while he was sitting next to her. She found it unacceptable and began to shake her head to push the thoughts away. Meanwhile, the young man's posture was relaxed, but the beautiful woman was starting to get nervous, as she realized that every time she looked at him or thought of him, she started to get very angry. Irina then looked at her desk mate and noticed that he probably didn't know anything about the Elysian language. Then she asked him a question about how he was going to pass the exam, but the guy only covered his eyes and answered her nothing, noting only that she had most likely passed her Elysian language test. But only that was a mistaken assumption, and from her reaction, the young man concluded that things were pretty bad for her. Meanwhile, the professor entered the classroom and began to take his seat behind the chair. Irina asked her neighbor where his textbook was, but he didn't have the book, as he had enrolled in the course late. Hearing this, the girl moved their desks and offered him the use of her textbook, which she put in the middle. The boy looked at her, and the girl was already saying that although their teacher seemed kind, he was actually very strict. To top it all off, he made up very difficult testing assignments and showed no mercy to any student when correcting mistakes, so she didn't understand why he chose this course. He looked at his desk mate's work, and she continued by saying that she was sure he would fail this exam. But then Irina turned to him and told him to remember to bring his textbook to the next class, since she wasn't going to help him anymore. The next class was fencing, and then it suddenly came to Irina's attention that Eleanor had signed up for all the courses that she had, since he was here as well. But she decided to test him and challenged him to a duel, informing him that he could not refuse as it was a mandatory duel for him. The guy said it would be an honor for him to fight her. The guys who were also sparring didn't understand why their comrade was trying something new every day, but at the same time, they were glad he came to these classes. It turned out that even though there were 2 other girls in the class, Eleanor promised the boys that he would fight them to the last man. In the meantime, Irina was worried that she wouldn't be able to give her best, but if she lost to him in this fight, she would be looked down upon by everyone. And so they began sparring. The girl remarked that he was very good at the sport, so she asked how much time he spent practicing. The guy replied that in his early childhood he lived in a very dangerous place, so he had a lot of opportunities to learn useful things. In addition, Eleanor noticed that all the guys who attended these classes were afraid to train with Irina, so she could only do it with him. Then he got serious and added that the more time she gained, the lower her winning percentage. So he remarked that she couldn't always win by force, so at times like this, she had to use her speed. After that, he added that with skills like hers, then she shouldn't even try to defeat an opponent using physical force. She needs to be nimble, he said, so she can figure out where her opponent's weaknesses are and hit them. In addition, you don't always get the chance to counterattack until you have the opportunity to do so. At that moment, a man approached them and said that he understood what Eleanor was talking about. Ludwig approached them, smiling. As soon as Irina saw her lover, she immediately interrupted her training and with all her legs rushed into his arms. The guy easily caught her and lifted her into the air. Such behavior of the couple did not like their fellow students very much. They thought that the lovers were desecrating their sacred training field. So the guys were angry and wanted to chase the couple away from the field. But the lovers did not pay their attention to the commotion that was going on around them. Ludwig asked the girl whether she had finished her training or not. Irina told him that yes, she had finished her workout, so she was very hungry now and asked him to go and eat with her. But the moment the couple was about to leave the training field, Ludwig turned around. But when he turned around, he met his gaze with Eleanor's cold blue eyes. This caused him to hesitate. The girl noticed the hesitation and pulled her boyfriend by the hand away from the training field. Eleanor was left to stare after them, and now the couple was already sitting in the shade of the park. Irina happily ate the food that her darling had brought for her, but the guy did not eat anything for her, but sat thinking about his own. The girl was absolutely delighted, as all these goodies were specially prepared for them by the Viscountess, Ludwig's mother. But the boy didn't listen to her chirping. He stared at one point in front of him and didn't react to her calls to him, because he was deep in his thoughts. At that moment, the guy woke up, looked at his beloved and said that his mum apparently loves and cares for Irina very much, as she likes her very much. The girl, however, did not like this aloof behaviour of the guy. She noticed that he was acting quite strange now. Ludwig suddenly remembered again the unusual behaviour of their fellow student and began to talk to Irina about him from afar. He looked at Irina and asked her if she thought Eleanor's behaviour and in general a rather odd young man. The girl was surprised by such a question, so she was curious to know from her boyfriend the reason why he said so. Ludwig himself did not know how to answer her question, so he simply asked her not to get close to the black-haired handsome man. Irina began crumpling the ruffle of her dress as she considered that her lover just didn't want her to be intimately involved with another guy besides him. When he heard that, he sighed and asked Irina why she chooses guys for her training. After all, it was only a basic fencing lesson, so he didn't understand why she had to put so much effort into it. After all, she was the daughter of a nobleman. Now the girl was angry and asked Ludwig to watch her tongue, for she had dreamed of learning the art of wielding a sword since early childhood. But the problem was that she had never tried her hand at it before. The girl reminded him that only 3 girls were attending these classes, so one of them would be without a date anyway. But even realizing this, the guy asked the girl why she consciously went to such an act. Ludwig sighed and called her a fool. The girl herself looked at him and asked if he still thought she was a child, because in essence, he should have said that she was different, so he should be proud of her. But in the young man's opinion, the matter was quite different, for she was a very kind girl. The guy realized that she didn't understand him, so he added that it wasn't about stupid jealousy, and he wasn't saying all this for that reason. The fact was that he had a strange and foreboding feeling. Ludwig was somehow convinced that Eleanor wasn't a particularly nice guy, so he shouldn't be trusted. Meanwhile, a black-haired handsome man has arrived at Count Schubert's estate on a visit to his father. The boy got out of the carriage and went into the house. He was greeted by the servants, who bowed their heads, but behind his back the maids were still whispering to him, washing his bones. The butler bowed his head to the lad as well and welcomed him home, and Eleanor remembered how this same man had picked up a whip and beaten him in front of his father's wife and other servants, how everyone had watched the abuse and remained silent while smiling. The man informed the teenager that his father was waiting in the library. The boy went to the door. His hand was shaking, but he opened it. Eleanor walked into the library. The man had his back to the door and was looking out the window. The boy asked his father about the purpose of calling him home from the academy. The Count turned his head to his offspring and said that it was time for him to take up his studies. It was known that for many years the Schuberg Mercantile Association had been famous for its fortune. To date, hardly anyone could say with accuracy when exactly the trade association filled all the territories with the sought-after materials. The Count confessed that he was ashamed that he had failed to raise his eldest son to be a good merchant. Therefore, the man wanted his youngest son to take over these responsibilities, as he was also a member of the Schuberg family. Eleanor was beginning to realize that now, for the sake of keeping their family on the same footing, then the trade would have to be his. The boy looked out the window of the academy building and thought about the fact that many aristocrats, and not only considered him inferior, but here, Irina Nodiak, the only and favourite daughter of the Marquis Nodiak, such a feeling was unfamiliar, as everyone bowed and bowed before her. The guy thought back to that moment when she gave him her handkerchief and was leaving. At that moment, he wanted to tell her all of the above. But now he realised that he couldn't lose the girl, even if it would be a worthy loss. Eleanor realised that for him to lose anywhere and to anyone was a disgrace, so he knew he had to wait patiently for his one chance at a decent victory. So the young man looked up and clutched the badge in his hand that indicated his status as a representative of the Schuberg Trade Association. He realised that he had finally gotten his chance, and his time had come to play big. Meanwhile, at the academy, the Elysian lesson was coming to an end, and the professor drew the attention of his students to an important historical event, namely that the monarchy had fallen in Elissa. Irina sat at the last desk and pondered that such a thing could have happened in Elissa, perhaps because the power of the monarchy was not as strong there as it was here in Ilfenom. The professor continued his lecture. He said that the special area as republican government was created after the disappearance of feudalism, and because of this, commercial capitalists emerged. The students listened to their teacher and thought it all sounded nonsensical, beyond imagination, and also unlikely. So, according to the Kissel calendar, in 443, the monarchy of Ilissus fell. It was then that feudalism was destroyed, and in its place a new class, the middle class, was created. Capitalism and republican government came into being. These events caused chaos on the other side of the sea. Meanwhile, Irina met a casual glance with Eleanor. The problem was that after her boyfriend's request, she had stopped attending fencing lessons, pretending to be sick to avoid seeing her classmate, and she was also the last one to go to the Elysian language class to avoid crossing paths with him. In other words, she was doing her best not to cross paths with him, but the guy had other plans, and even though he didn't approach her or talk to her, he was constantly looking only at her, and it made her very uncomfortable. The girl did all this so that her lover would not worry, as he was the one who asked her not to get close and to reduce communication with her classmate as much as possible. Eleanor, on the other hand, was smiling now for some reason, as if realizing that she felt a strong sense of guilt for her actions. With that smile and covered eyes, Eleanor was telling Irina that she was trying in vain to avoid meeting and communicating with him, for such behavior, on the contrary, attracted the attention of others. He more than anyone else was well aware of this. Meanwhile, the lessons were over, and it was evening. The sun had almost set over the horizon and coloured everything around in red-orange colours. Ludwig and Ira were the only two in the class. The boy noticed that she hadn't gone home this week either, but the girl didn't say anything about the reason for her decision to stay at the academy. But she wondered if her boyfriend would go home for the weekend. Ludwig lowered his head and said that yes, he was going to go home for a while. The girl, however, noted that it would be very boring without him at the institution. But he had a good reason to go home, namely one of his sisters named Carol was very ill. It seemed to be a common cold, but for some reason the girl could not get better. Irina took her lover's hand and said that she would ask her daddy to give him the medicine for his little sister. Ludwig realized that most likely this request from his daughter would make the Marquis very angry, as he disliked his family and disliked them quite a lot. So the guy smiled and told the girl not to worry, as he would be back soon. She also put her head on his shoulder and told him to be careful not to catch the disease from his sister. It had been several days, and there had been no news from Ludwig. Irina understood that he said he had to leave and that his sister was ill, but was Carol as ill as he said? The girl was bored, and more of these thoughts came into her head. And then she heard her classmates discussing Eleanor again, but only if they had insulted him and said mean things. Now they were discussing the news that he had started working for the Schuberg Trade Association. They didn't understand whether the guy had gotten a job there or whether he had inherited his family's trade association. They thought he was in a strange position, so he might be a simple worker. But if people aren't of high moral character, it can hardly make a difference. So these classmates were gloating over the fact that Eleanor was limping heavily on one leg today, as well as broaching the subject of his appearance in the world. She looked at her classmates and asked them why they were doing this, what the boy had done to them, why they were showing themselves in such an unsightly light. Eleanor froze at the door, not daring to push it open and go inside, listening to this dialogue. But the girls' buddies didn't stop, and at that moment she began to prove her point to them. She was the first to point out that Eleanor was indeed a strange and sometimes very gloomy fellow. Then she added that he was very stubborn and often did things that confused other people. The classmates looked at the girl. They only now realized that she was saying all this to them. But then she abruptly interrupted her speech, glared at her buddies, and said that Eleanor, as it were, had done nothing wrong for them to berate him in such a foul manner. Besides, if they all wanted to hurt the guy so badly, they should have said it all to his face instead of whispering behind his back. She asked her classmates to stop spreading rumours about the guy and making him look like a pervert in the eyes of others. She asked her classmates to stop spreading rumours about the boy and making him look perverted in the eyes of others. The young man could not listen to this. He went out into the yard. He walked with a quick step and thought that the classmates were right, and the girl, defending him, acted very rash and stupid, because only she alone knew nothing about him. Eleanor stopped abruptly. He realized that Irina was making a big mistake attracting and focusing his attention on herself. He understood that it was better for her own good to behave like the rest of her classmates. But she behaved in her own way. Even when she felt uncomfortable around him, she was protective and invisible. This was a problem, as the young man had no idea what he should do with all of this now. For always, up until this moment, he had envisioned and marched toward one single goal in his life, and everything else didn't matter much to him. But it was now that he realized to the pain in his chest what he truly desired. Eleanor wanted to get himself something that he would keep in his heart for many years of his life. Meanwhile, in her Elysian language class, the professor noticed that Irina looked sick, so she needed to see a doctor. But the girl claimed that she was fine, although she was sneezing. This gave the teacher the idea to go and see a doctor. Irina sat at her desk. She was proud of the fact that she hadn't missed a single class in all her studies up to this point, so no cold could stop her. The lesson continued. The teacher wrote something on the blackboard and talked about it, and Irina lay down on the desk. When she woke up, she noticed that Eleanor was standing next to her and reading a book. She didn't realize when he had managed to sit next to her. Then she closed her eyes again, but realized the guy had covered her with his jacket. The guy told the girl that she was like the waves of the sea in the early morning. She was so affectionate that she lit fireworks on the shore on a winter's day. And Eleanor continued to read Derry's poem. It was beautiful, so in that moment he and she felt those very waves with all their being. Irina didn't expect her classmate to be such an excellent reader, so she stared at him intently. And then she closed her eyes again and thought about the fact that the poem in Elysian sounded very beautiful, as the language itself was beautiful. Time passed, and it was time to graduate from the academy, so the students were handed out diplomas upon completion. Many parents were proud of their children's results. Ludwig got his diploma and then got distracted and waved at someone, smiling cheerfully. Namely, he waved to Irina. She noticed it and waved back, holding her diploma in one hand. The girl was glad that she had managed to talk her father out of coming to the ceremony after all. After the ceremony, she went to the garden that was in the backyard of the academy, so she went and sat in the gazebo, realizing that she wouldn't have the opportunity to walk these places in peace like this again. At that moment, Eleanor came up to her and stood beside her, smiling gently as he looked at her. He stood beside her and sincerely congratulated her on her successful completion of the academy. The girl reciprocated and said she was glad to be graduating too, and then Eleanor added that he was glad he had the opportunity to study with her. 8 years have passed. Eleanor had taken his chance to the fullest. He was sitting at his desk, studying the latest documents, when the butler came in. Things were completely different for Irina. She kept repeating to herself that nothing terrible was happening now, that she was not guilty of anything. Everything was simple and unfortunate. Her family had become bankrupt. What happened was that after the monarchy in Elissa was overthrown, the same thing happened to the monarchy in Ilfenom. The imminent collapse of the Kissel dynasty hit hard all the noble courts loyal to the royal family. Thus, the royal family was powerless to prevent the rapid growth of foreign capitalists and the third Kissel power. After that, there were wealthy commoners who joined together to form a separate class, which undermined the existing class system. But here's Eleanor Schuberg in all this mess getting the biggest benefit he could get. No one knew exactly how he took his place as his older brother, and thus managed to succeed his father, the Count. Over time, it turned out that he not only owned the capital's intelligence guild, the boy was also engaged in wastefulness, which among the nobility was frowned upon more than mercenaries. It happened that being able to do things that nobles never wanted to do put Eleanor in a very advantageous position. And so Irina sat in the drawing room in Count Schuberg's house and realized that this palace was much more richly furnished than her home before the bankruptcy. The girl touched her cheek as she was very worried and asked herself to calm down. An hour before this meeting, Eleanor had been actively going about his business in his office. Hans, the young butler who worked in the house, stood at the door of the study and watched his master work tirelessly and unceasingly. Therefore, the young man felt quite insecure, as he did not know when it was best for him to give the report he held in his hands to his boss. The other servants were even more afraid of their master than Hans, so they entrusted him with the mission of delivering the report, although the butler himself was afraid to be here in the study. But suddenly, Eleanor himself broke away from his business and asked the servant about Irina. This was the perfect moment to hand the papers to the gentleman, which Hans promptly did. The master of the house began to study the information he had gathered. It turned out that the butler had been constantly reporting Lady Irina's every move to his superior for the past 3 years. Now both servant and master knew that this girl preferred grilled meat to bread, and that she had gone to her hairdresser a year ago. Butler almost cried, as he knew Irina better than his mother. It looked very strange and abnormal from his point of view. But there was something more important than his personal worries. A servant told his employer that a lady had gone to the Earl of George's second son to borrow money. This made the Earl's mind wander from the report, for he realised that it was about Martin, the lad with whom he had been studying. And also, according to Hans's information, something happened in the office during that meeting, and the lady stoned Sir Martin by the forearm. Thus, she also had to pay for the treatment of a not particularly nice man. The Count glared and asked the servant to find out everything about the incident, as he knew that Irina wouldn't behave like that without a good reason. He also demanded that the lad prepare him a list of all of Martin's sources of income. The butler realised that although his boss looked calm, there was rage raging inside him now. The servant realised that such an order meant that another family would soon become bankrupt. But then he plucked up courage and asked his superior that perhaps he could help Lady Irina financially. After all, the butler realised that at this rate, the girl would have no choice but to go to a brothel and peddle herself to pay off all of her family's debts. The boy understood that his master would not stay away, but what he would do remained a big question, since even among the servants' opinions were divided about his sick affection for this girl. Some thought him obsessed with obsessions about Lady Irene. Others pondered whether their master even knew what love was. But, looking on the bright side, the Count little by little, using his patience, cleared the lady's path of all garbage and obstacles. All for one purpose, to be the only person who can help her. At that moment, another man came into the office. It was Jeren, the head of the Intelligence Guild. He said that Lady Irina had recently visited the Intelligence Guild headquarters. Both the scout and the butler, looking at their master, realised that these 3 years of his obsession and patience had borne their sweet fruit. And now Irina came to him and waited in the living room to meet him, still as beautiful as she had been 8 years before. The girl was a little uncomfortable, so the small talk was not going well, but she still said that they had seen each other a long time ago and asked how the young man was doing. Eleanor smiled charmingly and said that yes, they really hadn't seen each other since the day he had proposed marriage to her and she had refused to marry him. But overcoming her emotions, the girl said that it was shameful of her to come to him after such a thing. But she had no options left and came here to borrow some money from him. But she wasn't going to do it for free, and she was willing to help him with household chores in exchange for financial assistance, the guy interjected. Irina said she wouldn't be picky and would do whatever he asked. But then Eleanor noticed that he didn't need servants and other labour, as he had plenty of servants at home. This answer of the young man made it clear to the girl that it was time for her to leave. But the Count stopped her and said that if she wanted to make a deal, she had to offer the other party what she wanted. But her offer to him was now past the cash register, because it was not what he really wanted. He started to get up from his seat and said that he would relieve her of her debts, but would only ask one thing in return. Eleanor walked over to her, leaned over, and told her that he did not expect to capture her heart, but still asked her to be by his side from now on. The girl was not particularly impressed. She folded her hands in her lap and said that she was tired of telling him that she had someone she loved. But now, the Earl no longer claimed a place in her heart, so her love for another was no longer a reason for him to refuse her. At this point it came to the lady's attention what he meant. She realised that he was now claiming and wanting her body. At first there was a silent pause in the room, and then Irina jumped up and started yelling that he had no idea what he was asking for. She thought such a thing was unacceptable, and didn't understand how he could say such a thing. Eleanor, however, remembered the girl's words from earlier. He wondered if she still believed that money could not solve the problem of human affection. Yes, she kept insisting that the human heart could not be bought with money. Then she exploded with anger, pushed the table with her foot, and sent her former classmate far and wide to collect fly agaric in the woods. Irina stood now with her back to her former classmate, and said that she had always been underestimated, as she was not bad at math, thought faster than most, and was fluent in Elysian and Ilfenian. It got to the point where she could carry things if necessary. Eleanor turned and looked at her. But despite all this, everyone around her told her that she had to get married, even if it was to an old rich man. But she had to do it. Besides, she knew that her father wanted her to escape from this bottomless hell, so this option would be acceptable to him as well. After all, a woman who came from a fallen aristocratic family had little to offer in this world. After all the problems she had now could not be overcome with the pennies she earned every day. Therefore, only her body has a high price at the moment. The young man wanted to try to calm the girl down, to go up to her and touch her shoulder, but she pushed him away and walked away. The girl was very angry. She walked down the street, clenching her hands into fists. Abruptly, she stopped. Irina realized that now she was doomed, because this time she could not borrow money. Irina looked at her reflection in the window of the shop window, and realized that her mother was once absolutely right. Her character is disgusting and not capable of anything. It happened that her father had business problems for several years in a row, which caused the man to weaken both mentally and physically. But it just so happened that her mum died before their family went bankrupt, so it was a lifesaver and a huge stroke of luck for her. The girl noticed a middle-aged couple and thought about how his father needed to have someone like her mother around for things to work out differently. Irina recalled that both her mother and father often said and asked her to think 3 times before doing anything. The lady walked past the market stalls. She was well aware that she was several months overdue in her payment, but nevertheless, she was going to have some money by the middle of this week, so she could pay the moneylender a little. To top it all off, he had an Illinois class scheduled for tomorrow at the harbour for the kids. But she didn't want to think about the complications now, so she ran in an obscure direction. So, she went to a tavern and started getting drunk. Since she was a beautiful girl who drank by herself in a hot spot, drunken men started to pay attention to her. But the moment a couple of men approached her and started harassing her, she gave them the middle finger. After that, she got even angrier and went to leave the tavern. The girl walked out into the street. She realized that she kept meeting all kinds of jerks who were hitting on her. She was drunk now, but she noticed that the sun had not yet set over the horizon. Irina felt very tired and irritated with the whole world, but she did not notice that some person, a man, was following her. She was walking down the street, but at some point she realized that something was wrong, that someone was watching her. So she turned around, but she didn't see anyone strange there. Without noticing anyone, Irina walked forward. The man Eleanor had assigned to her to guard her was watching her from around the corner. And so she came to the house she was headed for, and it was Ludwig's house. A guy came down the stairs to the hallway, carrying a basin of water and a towel in front of him. Motome, he smiled, for he was happy to see her. The young man was sure that the girl had gone home, but then he froze as he realized that she was drunk again. Ludwig understood that his beloved was once again, far from the first time, she was drunk. But she didn't understand what he didn't like. So the young man froze. He was the eldest son of a titled family and had 3 younger brothers, but it was hard to tell from the way he looked and what he did. Irina could not stand on her feet well, so she plumped herself into a soft chair that stood downstairs, and the young man offered to boil her some soup for her hangover. Irina took off her shoes. The problem was that these cheap shoes were rubbing her very badly, so her feet hurt a lot. It wasn't long before the young man brought the girl a freshly made hangover soup in a cup. But the girl was in no hurry to drink it yet, and sat in the chair with her arms around her legs. She looked at the boy and asked him how Carol was feeling. The young man felt tired, so he answered one-wordedly, reporting that his younger brother was asleep. The girl was quite sad as she realized that his sleep, the boy was not getting any better. Ludwig sat down in a nearby chair and asked his beloved if she had been able to meet and borrow money from Eleanor. The girl said that yes, she had gone to see him, but the result was very predictable. And so Ludwig looked at the girl and said it's okay if something goes wrong. And then he added that Irina should listen to her heart, whatever it told her. These words of her lover discouraged the girl, and she demanded an explanation from him. Ludwig took her hand and said that it didn't matter what choice she made, he would accept it anyway, even if it wasn't in his favour. He had had enough of what she had done for him during the whole time they had known each other. This kind of questioning really pissed Irina off. She told her boyfriend to stop acting like an idiot. Ludwig looked at the girl. He thanked her for loving him so much all these years and loving him now. But here Irina was not going to leave her young man, as she loved him very much. The young man realized that she loved him so much that she wouldn't leave, but he needed to say it to her at least once. But nevertheless, the girl felt unpleasant from the words of her lover. She drank a volley of her anti-drinking soup and then decided to leave rather than listen to lectures. Ludwig remained seated in his seat and stared at the closed door. He didn't know what he should do to keep the girl close to him. The young man was well aware that he had nothing and had unconsciously decided to go down that path at one time. Irina was walking away, and the guy realized that at the moment of his fall, he was much lower in status behind Irina, and now the girl had fallen from her throne downwards. Ludwig also thanked the girl for not leaving him alone in the most difficult and terrible moment of his life, but he was concerned about how he could continue to keep the girl by his side. He knew he could give her nothing but sincere love, but the problem was that that love would destroy her. In the meantime, the girl had showered and started to get ready to go about her business. She knew very well that she was a well-educated girl. After 8 years, both nobles and commoners began to worry about their education. But still, there were not many educational institutions and not enough opportunities for learning. Irina was trying to find a decent outfit for class. She realized now that she had the 10th graduation diploma she had received at the academy to her credit. It was a good sign for her. After all, her income could now increase. The girl started to put on the earrings. She realized that yesterday she had been quite saddened by the situation with her lover. Nevertheless, the sun had risen again today. Beauty believed that the shiny treasures in this world still harbored countless traps. She had already gathered herself and was once again awake and full of energy and enthusiasm to start fighting for her bright future. So she was ready to put as much of her efforts as possible so that she would not regret anything in the future. Irina spun in place near the mirror. She felt refreshed in her new and beautiful dress. And so the girl arrived at the port of Cheyenne. The girl looked at the dial of her pocket watch and realized that most likely she was already a little late for her class with the local little students. But a man who looked like a mountain on legs suddenly appeared in front of her. She didn't know who he was. At that moment, someone else attacked her from behind and covered her mouth with his hand. Obviously, it was a kidnapping. But Irina wouldn't be herself if she didn't try to break free, so she bit the man's hand and got a wave of profanity directed at her. Meanwhile, at Count Schuberg's estate, Hans ran down the corridor to his superior's room. The butler burst into his master's room. He was quite agitated. The young man was being helped by the maids to dress, while he stood there with his shirt unbuttoned, looking intently at the man who burst into the room. Hans informed his master that the moneylenders had captured Lady Irina, imprisoned her on the ship, and were about to set sail. Representatives of the Scouts Guild had bribed the ship's captain to delay the sailing. The butler added that these very moneylenders had sent the Count a letter with their demands. The man had already dressed. He realized that this was to be expected. The man fixed his neck scarf. He understood the kidnappers' and moneylenders' train of thought, as they were the type of people who were always ready to do anything for money. At that moment, Hans realized the reason why Eleanor had ordered a few days ago to increase the guards and the number of people watching the girl, as he had anticipated this development. But now the man asked Lord what he should do next. Eleanor remained silent for the time being. He realized that if Irina had accepted his first marriage proposal, or his second, or at least yesterday had agreed to a unilateral proposal on his part alone, but that was not the case. But the girl was ready to defend her honor and self-love in the ways she loved, and for that she was willing to live for days in darkness, like the deepest sewer. The young man knew that although Irina was a smart girl, but in the end, he still couldn't bear to watch her life sink into darkness. So the Count gave orders to pay the Nodiak family's bills. Hans understood what he had to do, but there was another problem. When the girl was kidnapped, she actively resisted, so she was injured. Upon hearing this, Eleanor turned around and stared at the butler. He asked how badly Irina was injured, but their men had no such information, so he asked about their next course of action. Then the Count turned his back to the window again. He had decided to leave the matter entirely to Hans. Butler realized that he probably needed to kill those boys. But then the Count changed his mind. He said to let his men find out all about the personalities who had harmed Irina, and then bring them kindly to him. The young man stood by the window. He realized that even if the method was different this time, it made little difference. After all, even with this state of affairs, Irina will still not see him as a very bad man, and herself as his debtor. Eleanor realized that he was, as it were, the guy who had imposed her freedom and taken control of her life. If even for her, it was going to be quite agonizing. The young man also realized that at this point, the girl he liked had hit rock bottom. Then the door to the man's office opened, and Irina appeared in the doorway, wearing wrinkled clothes. He realized that he would do anything to make her choose a future with him in it. Irina was accompanied by Hans, who was standing next to her. Eleanor turned around and stared at the girl. He noticed not only the wrinkled clothes, but also the scratches on the girl's face. And at that moment, the Count interrupted the silence that hung in the study and ordered the butler to bring the girl's abusers to him alive. Hans bowed, accepting his master's orders. The man realized that this bastard would not die easily. Eleanor then turned back to the window again, and then asked the girl in a cold tone if she realized that if she had gotten on that ship, she would have been doomed. The man continued, squinting his eyes. He went on and said that there were a lot of bad guys in the crew of sailors, and a port was a place where it was too difficult and sometimes impossible to identify who had arrived or departed. The Count turned to the girl and asked if Kissel's ships could travel freely, for the people who governed this country did not have all the powers. After that, he approached Irina and said that her idea of teaching the children at the harbour was a very good one, but that going to the harbour alone was stupid, so he asked her not to go there alone. Irina was now looking at Eleanor with all her eyes, and she wondered how he knew about her teaching the children. She also remembered the man with the badge of the Schuberg Trade Association, who said that the Count, as the owner of the business, had solemnly invited her to his mansion. Then she saw on the ship, Eleanor's man hand over a sack of gold to her abusers. Meanwhile, in the present, Eleanor said that he had bought her debt and stopped all payments, so the girl was to live in his house from now on. Irina heard him perfectly well, but she was concerned about what would happen to her ailing father now. Eleanor informed her that the man had been moved to safety. The girl was embarrassed and took her gaze to the side. After that, she touched the wound on her face. The young man watched the expression on the girl's face and then said he would let her abusers out. The girl did not raise her eyes to the young man. This caused him to question her, so he asked her to answer honestly to one question of his. He had one question so far. He asked the girl if she was afraid of him now. Irina hesitated and said that she had been scared earlier, but now everything was fine, so she thanked him for his earlier help. Eleanor wanted to touch her, but stopped halfway and said that he had prepared a room for her, so he asked her to go there and rest for a while. So Irina left the young man's office, and she went to the room prepared for her. The maid also brought her a change of clothes. When the girl was alone in her new room, she clutched her pajamas to her chest, crouched down, and pressed her back against the door. Irina realized that she needed to tell Ludwig about everything that had happened today, as well as find a way and visit her sick father. But what to do after all this, she had no idea. So the morning came. The girl opened her eyes. She realized that she was in the Count's house, as she had been in the evening, in her new pajamas and her new room. Irina sat up in bed and didn't look particularly spry. After that, she realized that she had to do something. So after that, she started to make her bed, then got up, went to the window and opened the curtains. After that, the girl decided to give herself a new hairstyle, tying her hair into a high ponytail. She used a satin ribbon to match her dress. Irina also decided that it was time for her to gain strength and face new circumstances. The girl then left her room and from around the corner watched the doors to the Count's study and the corridor of the manor. Be that as it may, the servants at the manor were quite polite to her. They noticed that the girl had woken up early and looked much more awake than yesterday. But the longer Irina stood around the corner and observed the situation in the house, and in this hallway in particular, for it was deserted, a little gloomy, and very quiet, Irina decided to walk. She had no idea what she should do now and what to do next. The girl realized that on the one hand it was good that the place was so deserted, but at the same time it made them very tense. And so the girl finally found what she was looking for, or rather even who she was looking for, namely the head maid. At that moment, the woman turned her attention to a girl who appeared not far from her. Irina came as close as she could to the woman, and said with a charming smile that she was glad to see the older maid. The woman and the girl stood opposite each other and were silent. It turned out that the head maid of the Count's house was a noblewoman. The girl sold her title and became a commoner. The older maid interrupted the silence. She asked the guest if she had slept well today, if she had gotten a good night's sleep. The woman also said that during his stay here, the girl could address her with any question, as she would do her best to make her stay here as comfortable as possible. Irina got embarrassed and said that the maid didn't have to say and suggest all that. After that, to recover a little, she slapped herself on the cheeks, and it was quite painful. The girl looked again at the older maid and said that she was not in this house as a guest, but to work. Such a thing surprised the woman quite a lot, but the girl was already pointing at the junior maids and asking for a similar uniform. Meanwhile, in his office, Eleanor was working with papers. At this moment, the butler came in and brought his master a cup of tea, and then the Count asked the servant how Irina was adapting. Hans didn't know what to say to that, as the job description didn't say how one would answer that kind of question. He assumed that since the girl was a noblewoman, she was probably still asleep, but he wasn't sure about that. But Eleanor was of a different opinion. He was sure that the girl had been awake for a long time. After all, early rising could help Irina feel better, after her family had lost absolutely all their fortune and influence. Having received a similar rebuke, Hans decided to go and see how things were going with his guest. And as the butler was almost leaving the study, Eleanor had him ask and offer Irina breakfast with him. The butler and the other servants set the table, but the boy was very much surprised that it was full of meat dishes, as if for dinner. Besides, everyone in this house knew that their master did not like meat. And here was such a menu. The Count had already taken his seat at the dinner table and was waiting for the girl, who was not yet present. But Hans said that the lady had agreed to come and keep the Count company with pleasure. But there was one small problem that the butler had not had time to report. Irina was dressed in her maid's uniform and came to breakfast in it. Eleanor looked at her carefully. His view of her did not please him, and he clenched his fist to keep from voicing all his worries instantly here and now. He was aware that the girl wanted to pay him her debt as soon as possible and leave him alone again. The man exhaled, closed his eyes and suggested that she sit down at the table first. The girl was embarrassed but obeyed and decided to sit down. Now they were sitting at the same table, opposite each other. The Count asked his guest if she had not slept well, for she did not look her best. Irina looked at it too, and said that she was very comfortable sleeping in the new place, but it felt very unfamiliar and uncomfortable. The young man then asked what had happened to her clothes and what she was now wearing, but the girl was silent. So the young man said for her that he understood what she was trying to say with her actions, but he hoped that he could see her in outfits of a different quality. Irina did not understand what was wrong with her, because it seemed to her that everything looked very good for her, but at the same time she thought that she probably looked strange to him. But the Count silently sipped his tea, so it could be assumed that he thought it was true. Irina, on the other hand, was indignant and said that in her opinion everything looked very good on her. Eleanor interrogated the girl, wondering if she liked the maid outfit herself. Irina smiled and said it was the perfect outfit, as she was very comfortable in it. The Count sighed, covered his eyes again, and said he would prepare comfortable outfits like this one for her tomorrow. After that, he silently got up from the table and slowly walked over to the girl and apologized to her in advance for his further actions. And then, in one swift motion, he ripped off the bonnet she had placed on her head earlier. Her hair cascaded over her shoulders. The man then threw the girl's closet item to the floor and stepped on it. This action at least slightly improved the young man's mood, brought some moral satisfaction. But it made the girl angry. Irina looked at the man and asked why he behaved in such a rude manner. But the Earl paid no attention to this remark and was already sitting back in his place at the table. Then he said that it was time for them to begin their meal. Irina agreed, but then asked him about whether she could eat while at the same table as him. And since she didn't get an answer to her question again, she decided to try a piece of meat after all. The maid, who stood behind the girl's back, thought that the guest cared about the question of master-servant relations exactly until she began to eat. Irina asked Eleanor if there was no place in his house where servants ate. The Count said that there was such a place, but he was lonely eating alone, and though he realized that she would probably not be pleased to sit beside him and eat, he could not help himself. This was not quite true, so they wished each other a pleasant appetite and began to eat. She the meat, he the lettuce leaf. Irina ate everything on her plate, but then she said that if a man kept looking at her like that, she would lose her appetite. The girl said it was likely the young man had never heard of Sir Nikan's saying that food fills not the body, but the soul. To this, Eleanor had something to contradict the girl, and he continued. The man said that not long ago he had read a paper by a scholar named Durkle that excessive meat-eating made people fierce, based on a study of the people of Kellyan, who ate a lot of meat and were very warlike. But then he pretended he was joking and asked the girl to keep eating. At that moment, Hans approached Irina and reached over to her glass to pour her a drink. So the man poured some water into his glass, and she watched in silence as her glass filled with the drink. The butler looked the girl in the eye and asked her if there was anything else she might need. Irina said that everything was fine and she didn't need anything else. She asked him if he worked here as a butler. The man said that she was right and that he works here as a butler, and his name is Hans. Hearing this, the girl asked the young man to call her by her name, not to worry or be embarrassed. At this moment, Hans felt his master's cold, vicious, full of cold gaze on him, so he covered himself with cold sweat. The situation was starting to get more heated by the minute, so he mentally asked her to spare him. The butler began to wipe his forehead with a handkerchief, as he was becoming more and more uncomfortable by the minute. The man said he would call her Lady Irina, as he felt most comfortable. At this point, the girl was thinking about the fact that she needed to make a to-do list of things to do, but she could feel the tension hanging everywhere. But other than that, Eleanor was too kind and polite to her. The problem was also that she treated and spoke to him quite rudely, rather than politely and nicely. The girl also realized that not only Eleanor was polite to her, but the head maid, butler, and all the other servants of the manor were polite and treated her as an honored guest. Gathering her thoughts, the girl asked the young man about how much the servants were paid in this estate. Eleanor, on the other hand, asked her a counter-question, asking if she knew what was most important to an investor when choosing a project and a person to invest in. Investors put their money only there, and when they are 100% sure that their debtors will be able to repay their debt obligations to them. So now the girl had to prove to him that even at her worst, she would be able to repay her debt. Only then could someone lend her the money. The man was sorry, but he realized that Irina would not be able to earn the necessary amount of money to pay off the debt while working as a servant in his house. As unpleasant as it was to realize, it was the pure truth of harsh reality, and such facts can easily hurt an unprepared person. The girl herself realized all this, then as it was, but giving up, thinking that there was nothing she could do, she was not going to do. So she asked the Count to let her work in his house and earn money. The girl promised Eleanor to work hard and try her best. Eleanor stood in his study after breakfast, and the head maid bowed low to him and begged his pardon, for Lady Irina had come to her herself and asked her to give her work. But the Earl was not angry, at least not at the woman, so she looked up and asked him what job she should give her. The man didn't like the question, but nevertheless told them to let Irina do whatever she wanted to do. So the sounds of horse-drawn carriages were heard outside the house. The servants began to push each other, for their lord was about to leave on his business, so they all had to hurry to see him off. Irina, however, didn't understand what was going on around her, so she stopped one of the maids and asked her where all these people were running to and why. The youngest maid stopped and looked at the guest of the manor and said that all the servants of this house went out into the courtyard every day to see off the master who was on his way to work. Irina realized that since everyone was doing it, she needed to do the same, as this was going to be her first assignment, for which she thanked the blonde. So the girl grabbed the younger maid by the hand, and they ran into the courtyard to the rest of the servants. So the whole courtyard was swarming with people. A few horse-drawn carriages stood in rows. The maids lined up on both sides of the road, bowed their heads in bow, and waited for their master to come out. Irina was also standing in one of the rows, but unlike the others, she was looking in the direction from which the Count was about to emerge. And so the girl waited. The man came out of the house and headed for the carriage with Hans walking beside him. The girl appreciated the appearance and demeanour of the young man. Eleanor had already approached the carriage, about to open the curtain and get in, and then he froze and looked back a little. The man was about to get into the carriage, but then he noticed his guest standing among the maids. But then the young man stood up, abruptly turned around and walked briskly towards Lady Irina. This act caused a wave of surprise among all present. Irina didn't understand what happened, why he decided to approach her. He stood and mentally asked the young man not to approach her. And so the Count was already standing in front of the girl and talking about the fact that the girl this time came to see him off. This attention slightly embarrassed the beauty. The young man didn't like how constrained the girl started talking to him, so he asked the girl to behave normally with him. He wasn't going to leave the girl alone so soon, so he asked her what she was going to do after he left. The girl admitted that she hadn't decided yet. Eleanor informed her that he had spoken to the head maid before, so she needed to be very stressed. Irina agreed to his demands. Then Eleanor added that he thought it would be better for everyone if she did nothing at all. But Irina could hardly contain herself and asked the man to hurry up because she didn't like the way everyone was looking at them. The girl stared at her opponent. She was getting angry and asked the Count to leave, but he pretended not to hear what she told him and asked her to repeat it. The young man kept prodding the guest, saying that he couldn't hear her and asked her to repeat everything she said again. Irina walked almost right up to the man and, with all the anger that had accumulated in her, told him to get out of here as soon as possible and added a foul word. Now the man was quite pleased as the girl was behaving as usual, so he smiled and said that it was now time for him to leave. Nevertheless, the Count promised that he would soon return, and Irina did not understand how a man could be so troublemaking and live and do business in peace. Meanwhile, the action shifted to Shane, the headquarters of the Schuberg Trade Association. A man handed over a report from the Sapiens Intelligence Bureau. The scout said that all 3 bordering countries had a very good harvest this year, so the merchants of those countries were sure that prices would drop dramatically for goods. They didn't need that much anyway, so they wanted to make deals with them. The young man thought for a moment. He wanted to start trading with Ilfenom, but the civil war there had been going on for 3 years now, causing food shortages, but the demand for food kept growing. Nevertheless, there was a certain problem. The guy didn't know, like everyone else, who would win in this confrontation, the Republicans or the King's Party. So, he didn't know how to find out who would win in this confrontation in the Civil War. After all, if he knew this information, he would be able to sell the winning side exclusive merchandise to them. However, the man also realized that the time for active action had not yet come, so it was necessary to proceed with caution. The scout suggested his employer find out which side the Ilfenom trade union was on, so he suggested taking a roundabout way this time. However, the problem would probably be the reduced profits compared to direct trade. Eleanor thought and mouthed the fact that although the situation continued to be unstable, Ilfenom's population was larger than Kissel's. So this country could be a big market in the long run, but still they needed to be careful. Jeren was covered in sweat after those words, realizing that his superior was continuing to remind him of one of his failures. Eleanor continued and said that if all the deals went through, they would have a huge influence in the Ilfenom market. So after that, they wouldn't have to worry about profits in the future, and no matter who won the civil war, they would still be on the plus side, but the parties needed to win first. Therefore, the Count decided to wait to see how the confrontation in Ilfenom ended. Meanwhile, at the Count's estate, Irina tried to chop wood, but the girl did not understand why she could not do it. The man who was responsible for this process looked at the girl and told her that if he continued to do everything as he was doing now, she would not succeed. The worker said that instead of using brute force to strike, he advised her to channel that force to vent her anger. The girl thought the idea sounded pretty good, so she decided to try and do what he said. The moment Irina swung the axe, it overbalanced, and she began to tumble backwards. The maids and the woodsmen shrieked and asked her to be careful, as they were afraid to even approach her at that moment. The only one who wasn't afraid was Eleanor himself. He took the axe away from the girl and held her by the waist, preventing her from falling. The Count did not let the girl go, as he realized that this was a great opportunity for him to be at least a little closer to her. But suddenly he asked the girl what she was going to do with that axe. Irina started to get angry again, and like a fury began to say that if he was so interested, she would tell him. She said she was chopping wood, and he couldn't see that. It was a small mistake on her part, as the Count looked angrily at his employees, and they were almost scared to death. Irina, on the other hand, decided to shift the man's attention. She asked him to move away from her a little, as she was feeling a little uncomfortable, and she was perfectly fine. The Count then asked the girl to walk him home, and she was a little taken aback by the question and interrogated him about it. The man repeated his question and added if she would help him. The girl didn't understand what he wanted to say with this question, but as the girl understood nothing, the man let her go and went into the house alone. Hans followed him, and the girl was left standing with the other maids. Irina did not understand the former classmate. She thought he was a very strange person at that moment, and the workers were surprised that their master behaved completely differently than he always did with everyone. One of the maids, a blonde with a bob, understood that her master was just as sweet and smiling as he had been that morning, as he drove to work, and they saw her off. The maid had no idea that Count Schuberg could smile so sincerely, for the Count she knew so well was a completely different person. For she remembered him quite differently, cold-blooded, detached, angry and bloodied, with corpses lying at his feet. Daisy was pulled out of her memories by Irina. She suggested that she go and find the head maid, because maybe she had new tasks for them. Irina grabbed the younger maid's hand and pulled her behind her. She was crying as she thought of when the lady would stop ruining their estate. Meanwhile, in his room, Eleanor was changing his clothes and asked his butler not to put any more axes in his hands or let him chop wood. Hans said he would do so. After all, the Count realized that if the girl tried this task again, she would chop someone's leg off, and still no firewood. Eleanor lay down in the hot bath. Steam appeared around him like a light mist. The man sat in the bathroom afterward and thought about what he already knew about her not doing well on the estate. The man understood that such a thing was to be expected, for she had been and was brought up as the favourite daughter of the Marquise, bathed in luxury, and never did anything around the house, as all the work was done by the servants. Among other things, the young man understood perfectly well that no one had hired Irina or forced her to teach the children at the port. She had wanted to do it herself. The Count decided to dive headfirst into the bathroom water. Meanwhile, in the corridor, Irina had broken one of the expensive vases. The butler stood behind her back and told her to leave the shard collecting for others, and he would personally tell the Count that she was already doing a fine job with all her errands. But Irina was against this decision, as she needed a little more time to get used to everything that was happening in her life now. She realized that she would never gain the necessary experience if the other maids did everything for her. And in the bathroom, Eleanor came out of the water. He realized that Irina was a little clumsy, but with her curiosity and the effort she put into it, she could succeed. Although the girl would become an outstanding and beautiful person in the future, but at the same time, her enthusiasm could and was becoming a huge problem. So, Irina got a new task. She needed to clean the windows. To do this, she unscrewed a rag and started rubbing the glass of one of the windows. While working, the girl recalled that the moment her family lost everything they had, many people began to berate and insult her. These same people wanted to curse her at least once, just to gloat, and others began to call and insult her with the last vulgar words. What happened was that all the friends who pretended to love and respect her, now they were bullying and poking fun at her. Her so-called friends even tried to reward her with the most difficult tasks in order to trample her self-esteem. In those moments, the girl would check out her friends and buddies, and even hate them. But at the same time, she often wanted to go back to the carefree past of her life. Often Irina wondered if she had lived so immorally that she now had to accept and bathe in the hatred of all those people. The more she thought about the situation, she realized that she could not understand the actions of her former friends and acquaintances. But then she realized that some members of humanity take great pleasure in other people's suffering. At that moment, the head maid came to Irina. She handed the girl a white envelope, in which was her first paycheck for a month of hard work at the estate. The girl wiped her hands on her apron, and then she picked up her envelope and was very much pleased with the reward she had received for her work. The older maid admitted that she had enjoyed working alongside the girl, so she said she would enjoy working with her in the future. Irina spent another month in the Count's house. Once again they sat at the dining table and had breakfast. The man asked the girl if she had slept well, and if she had slept well today. The butler, the head maid, and Daisy stood in silence, thinking that perhaps the girl had not yet adapted well to this house. A maid named Daisy was thinking about how their master doesn't like complexity, so he doesn't eat breakfast quite often, and when speaking, he just makes eye contact or lifts his chin. But he was changing around Irina, so the maid realized that this girl was far from being his usual guest. At that moment, Irina approached the young man and handed him a white envelope. She said that it was money, and even though it was not much, but she wanted to give it to him, because she had received her salary yesterday. Irina realized it would probably be too much if they opened the envelope right here and now and looked at how much money was in there. Eleanor realized this was giving the girl a hard time, so he said she could just put the envelope down and not open it in front of him or the servants. The girl was embarrassed. She informed him that what she really wanted to do was to give him the envelope quickly, so that's what she did. This did not please the young man. Although from the very beginning, he understood the nature of their relationship. He was the creditor, she was his debtor. It was written in their contract. The man, however, realized that the best option for the girl would be for her to stay here, as he would be able to tame her ardent temper. At the same time, the Count didn't want the girl in his house to be uncomfortable, and the creditor and debtor relationship. He definitely didn't like it. Yes, and the money she gave him now made both her and him feel uncomfortable and awful. However, Eleanor, if he allows her to pay her debt, grant her freedom and pray for her happiness, it will be too difficult for him. After all, come to think of it, such a development was not at all what he really wanted. The Count looked at the girl and asked her one question. He wondered if the thought of having breakfast with him was so disgusting to her. At that moment, Irina looked surprised at her employer. She didn't understand why he asked her that particular question, why he thought that. The girl was thinking hard, but she couldn't find an answer, so she said she had a talent for not understanding what he was saying, so she asked him to explain it to her in order. But since she didn't get an answer, she decided to make her feelings clear. She slapped her palm on the table and said that she was a very happy girl because she could work, earn money, and do many different interesting things on her own. Irina added that there was nothing scary or incomprehensible in her actions. After all, it was just an ordinary demonstration of herself and her pride, with no hidden meaning. But the girl with a serious look began to talk about how everything that was happening was not part of her plans. Such an overly serious look from the lady caused the master of the house to smile. Irina suddenly realized that her former classmate had made up a bunch of weird stuff, and after all, she had just started her fiery speech. She was not so far from the truth. The man thought that she was avoiding him because she hated him, but the girl objected and said that she had never hated him. Eleanor asked her not to lie to herself at least. He added that he didn't like hypocritical people, and he wasn't afraid to speak openly about such things. So many people thought he was crazy, out of his mind. This speech caused the girl to question, and the Count had already told her not to pay attention to it, as he was the one who was too sensitive. And then he added that the girl could sit down and eat in peace. Then Eleanor looked down at his cup of tea and said she shouldn't think too hard about her own words either. After that, Irina took her seat at the table. She thought her head itched too much. And the rest of the servants finally exhaled in relief, for the tension between the young people had been too great. After breakfast, the girl went to work in the kitchen. She was washing dishes. Suddenly, Daisy came to her and said that the Count was going to leave for work, so they had to go and see him off. But the problem was that Irina didn't want to go outside, and the maid noticed that if the lady herself did not go outside, the Count himself would find her wherever she was. Irina suddenly realized that this was the reason why everyone around her was looking at her so intently. As it was, the beauty had to leave her work, and with all the others, she went out into the courtyard and waited for the Count to come out. And now he came out, and as soon as he noticed the girl, he began to approach her, and she mentally asked him not to do it. A young gentleman came up to the girl, reached out and touched her headwork, and told her it didn't suit her. This infuriated Irina. She didn't understand why he cared so much and why he was telling her this. Irina decided to explain everything to the man. She said that if she didn't wear a bonnet while working, her hair would get dirty and interfere a lot with her. The young gentleman then approached the beauty from behind and touched her hair, which spread over her shoulders. Eleanor carefully began braiding the girl's hair into a braid. The man quite nicely and neatly braided the girl's braid and then asked her how she felt with her new hairstyle. Irina didn't know what to say, and Eleanor leaned over to her ear and said that she shouldn't have worried, as she had very pretty hair. After that, the Count went to the carriage and said that he had to go to work, and the girl looked after him, thinking that what had happened was a little too much. Since Irina had some free time, she decided to go to visit her lover. The young man opened the door to her, but was very surprised to see her at home. The girl did not ask permission to enter the house, but walked brazenly inside. The guy had nothing better to do than ask why she had come. The beauty reached the chair and sat down in it tiredly. She didn't understand what was wrong, because she had a very ordinary day off today and decided to visit her favourite person. Ludwig exhaled and offered to make her a cup of tea. The girl agreed, as it seemed like a great idea to her. Then she remembered that she had important business to attend to. But before she started the important conversation, she looked in front of her and noticed a stain on the ceiling and said that most likely the rainy days had caused the ceiling to get so weird. She realised that if nothing was done, it would leak. Ludwig brought tea and said he would get someone to help him solve the problem. But Irina realised that the longer she waited, the more trouble this stain could cause. Then she noticed a knife on the table and took it in her hand. The girl reached up and stretched her hand with the knife to the ceiling and decided to stab it in several places, where the biggest stain was. And when she had finished, the water that had accumulated in the attic poured from the holes the knife had made. It flowed into the bucket the young man had set up. Ludwig did not understand why his ancient and once beautiful house now seemed so shabby. And then the young man heard the girl's words. She said that she wanted to dance very much, but he didn't understand why she wanted to do something like that. The dripping of water from the ceiling seemed to her like the rhythm of a waltz, and so Irina began to dance. Her movements were light, elegant and beautiful. Ludwig looked at the girl mesmerized, and then he put his arm around her shoulders and asked her to put the knife on the floor, for she might hurt herself or him. Irina was smiling. She was beautiful, and the young man realized that just one look at her was enough for him to make all her problems disappear. The young man was well aware that not always and not under all circumstances the dripping of water could turn to the sound of music. Suddenly Irina remembered that she had business to attend to with Ludwig, so she first asked him to sit down in the chair, as she had something for him. When the young man took his place in the soft chair, and before him on the table appeared a white envelope. But what was in it he did not understand, so he clarified what the girl brought. The girl said that she had received her first paycheck the other day, but she didn't bring him much money this time, because she had her own obligations financially to the Count. She asked her lover to take this envelope and find a good doctor for Carol. Ludwig realized that the medication for his sister was very expensive, but he wasn't sure if he should take the envelope. The man felt slightly insulted. He didn't understand how he could take financial support from her. But the girl did not understand why he could not take this money. After all, she had brought it not to him, but to Carol. Irina reflected on the fact that a few years ago, while her family's situation was different and they still had plenty of money, she could have then asked her father to find the best doctor for her lover's sister. Only now did the girl realize that she had been a naive child for too long. Now, however, the girl realized that people lose their lives more easily than she had thought. Beyond that, the situation can change much faster than you might expect, and misfortune comes as quickly and unexpectedly as the flu. At the time when Irina was studying at the academy, she had not expected that something like this could happen. After all, in those days everything was very easy and calm. But Ludwig still could not agree to accept the money from her, for she was in no better position than he was, for she was also in debt. Irina said her debt is like an ocean, so no matter how many spoonfuls of water, money, she pours into it, nothing will come of it. So the girl thought it would be much better if she started using them in a more practical way. The girl said that there was not much money in the envelope, because her situation was not much better than the young man's, so she asked to accept it, because otherwise she would feel embarrassed. But Ludwig himself was thinking of something else. His insecurity and humiliation showed more than ever before the girl. Always he thought that such a condition of his was due to personality problems. He also thought it might be due to financial problems. But now Irina had lost everything like him, so it wasn't about money either. Ludwig wasn't quite sure what he felt for the girl right now, whether it was shame, failure, inferiority, or love. The young man asked sadly if Eleanor knew that she had brought the money to him. This surprised the girl, because she had personally earned the money, so she didn't understand why she had to tell him where and how she spent it. Then Ludwig asked about whether the Count had done anything strange to her. The girl interrogated him about it. The young man repeated his question and clarified if Eleanor had touched her in any strange ways in unaccustomed and unacceptable places. This assumption offended the girl, for nothing like this had ever happened in all the time the girl had lived in the Count's house. And then the girl remembered the former classmate leaning close to her ear and whispering words this morning. Ludwig took her reaction as confirmation of his assumptions. So he grabbed her arms and started yelling and asking if the girl was okay, and where the Count had touched her. The young man held the girl's hands tightly in both of his hands and at the same time frightened her a lot as he kept shouting at her and did not let go of her hands. But Irina tried to save face and not betray her feelings, so she answered quite calmly that far from Eleanor was the man who had touched her inappropriately and done something wrong. After all, it was Ludwig who was now allowing himself to be unnecessary, hurting her physically and mentally, so she pointed it out. These words sobered the young man a little, so he let go of the girl's hands, apologized, but still stood towering over her as well. It was a new day. The girl was working in the kitchen again. Now she was trying to peel potatoes and thinking about everything that had happened yesterday, and a certain heaviness formed in her heart. At that very moment, one of the maids came up to her. She held in her hands a tray of beautiful and appetizing cakes. Irina drooled at the sight of these delicious delicacies, for she had not eaten anything like this for a long time, but she loved it. And the maids asked her to do them a favor and take these delicacies to their master. The girl took the tray in her hands and was about to leave when she suddenly thought about the fact that, as strange as it may seem, she had the impression that a number of errands were always connected to Eleanor. Nevertheless, a job was a job, and she went to do it purposefully, even if she didn't really want to do it. And the maids did have ulterior motives. They did not like and were afraid to serve their lord personally, so they were glad that they could dump this part of their work on the guest. One of the girls admitted that she still had nightmares about their first meeting with the current count. The second maid also said that she couldn't forget how they had to clean up the corpse and the blood. But such a fascinating discussion was interrupted by the older maid with her cough, who had been standing behind their backs for some time. She sternly ordered the girls to stop talking and go back to their direct duties. They apologized and said they would immediately start their new assignments. The older maid sighed heavily. She realized that no matter how hard they tried to hide the whole corpse thing, everyone knew about it. The woman now knew that her young master was a cunning and devious traitor who had long ago planned and leisurely acted from the shadows to accomplish his goal. A young man turned loan shark who financed a company that was on the verge of bankruptcy. He was also the co-owner of the casino his father liked to frequent, which eventually ruined him. And on the day the maids mentioned, the old count learned that his youngest son had a hand in everything that had happened to him. And it all led to terrible family bloodshed. And Eleanor became the heir and new Count Schuberg, since he had no other family members left. But what surprised the woman now was how such a man as the Count could calmly treat the fact that Irina, wanting to work, spoiled his precious things, and he only nodded and said that nothing terrible had happened. Remembering all the mishaps that had happened to the lady, the head maid concluded that she was a very troublesome guest. Meanwhile, Irina had already arrived at the young Count's office, unceremoniously stepped inside, and told him that he needed a snack while he worked. The man broke away from filling out and studying another document and looked carefully at the girl who came in with a tray of food. He, on the other hand, thought it was his chance to earn some points, and he offered the girl to eat a brownie with him. But Irina objected and said that she couldn't eat with him because she had a lot of things to do. Eleanor wondered what kind of things the girl had to do. Belle admitted that she had been pulled away from an important task. She had been peeling potatoes before coming here. The Count asked how she had done with that task. The girl immediately remembered her potatoes, which looked quite strange after peeling, and remained silent. Eleanor understood everything without words. He just smiled sweetly and offered to show the girl how to peel potatoes properly. Irina, on the other hand, was surprised, as she hadn't expected the young man to have had to do something like this before. The Count smiled again and reminded his guest that he had not lived during his childhood and youth in an expensive mansion. So yes, he knew how to peel potatoes and more. So the young man brought the girl out of her reverie and said that it was time for them to go peel potatoes. But Irina protested again and said that she could handle the task herself, because the other servants might feel uncomfortable if their master came into the kitchen and started working as equals with them. But that wasn't an argument for Eleanor, as he was the owner of this estate, and he was the one who paid each worker's wages, so their opinions didn't really bother him. The man did not understand why this matter should concern him, why it should concern him whether his servants felt comfortable around him or not. The girl realized that the man was telling the pure truth, so she had nothing to do but to walk silently to the kitchen with the young man. When they entered the room, there was a silent pause, many of the servants trembling with fear under the gaze of their master, and the girl realized that she had probably made a mistake in bringing the man here. To avoid attracting more and more attention and embarrassing the others, she dragged the young man to a corner of the room so that they began peeling potatoes there. So they settled down in a corner and began peeling potatoes. The Count, like many other things, did it perfectly, which did not escape the girl's eyes, and he said that he peeled potatoes very well. A strange question formed in Irina's mind, and she asked Eleanor if, before he became an earl, he had made his living by peeling potatoes. The man smiled and replied that you could tell he was naturally good with a knife. They peeled potatoes in silence for quite a long time, and then it happened that the man asked the girl that maybe he had debts that he didn't know about. He was curious about where she spent her money. The man didn't realize if it was inappropriate of him to ask such a thing. After all, if he had to, he would have sent an additional sum of money and a man to look after him. But the girl, of course, kept silent, for she understood that the man was right, for he loved and cared for her father, but such a thing she could not accept from him as a favor. Irina said that there was a man, not her father, who needed help much more. So, when he was very ill, she took and gave part of her salary to this man, but she felt very sorry that she had offended him by her actions. The man looked at the girl and said that he was patient, but at the same time he was not a very understanding person, and moreover not a good person. Eleanor added that he let the girl do whatever she wanted, but only for the purpose of putting her mind at ease. But he can't let the girl sacrifice herself for this man. So the Count reminded the girl of how and under what circumstances she had come into his house. After all, everything that had previously belonged to her father now belonged to him. Irina didn't like the way he presented this information to her, because it trampled her ego. The girl understood, and concluded for herself that the guy was bad, so whatever he said wouldn't fix her opinion of him. This amused the young man a little, and he looked at the girl, smiled, and said that she was too late in realizing this truth. After all the people around him knew about it. Irina was angry, for the girl looked at him with kind eyes, which made her defenseless to him. Suddenly, the young man said that even if that was the case, she didn't need to treat him too well. Then he added that the girl shouldn't be on his side. The girl suddenly remembered that a young man had said something similar at the academy. He had said then that the girl should have left him behind, gossiping and speaking against him. Irina remembered that at that time he thought that he could think that all people in the world were the same, and then he could continue to live his own life. After all, it was the girl's own fault that she herself had approached him and left such a deep impression in his heart. Now the beauty was angry, for she did not like the way he had chosen to repay her for her kindness. But that was not the case at all. The man said that he repaid her in a completely different way, namely he returned everything in money. Irina was a little taken aback at such insolence, because she said that she worked in his house not for free. Eleanor glanced again at Belle, for he was well aware that he needed a good excuse for the girl to stay by his side and remain at his side. Then the young man turned away and began peeling potatoes again. And then he added that now he could use all the means at his disposal to do so. Irina remembered the moment when the Count had first asked her out, when he had used her handkerchief as an excuse. Now the girl understood that although the man was a nobleman, he made her sympathize with him like a delicate flower in the desert. They had almost finished peeling potatoes, so the young man asked the girl if she could clean his room after she finished cleaning it. The girl agreed. And so, when the girl finished with her chores in the kitchen, she and the young man came to his room together. The girl began to look around the room and realized that everything was so clean that it sparkled. Irina tried to find at least one link, so now she asked if the man was all right or not. He didn't understand what she meant. She went on to start picking out dust or dirt, but here she added that it was most likely a manifestation of his illness. But since Irina couldn't find the dust on the windowsill, she started looking for it on the top shelves and on the mantel. She hoped she could find the dirt there. Eleanor, on the other hand, watched the actions of the beauty before him with a smile. After that, the Earl started another meeting. His interlocutor talked about how the news said that the royal party continued to dominate the civil war, so it was possible that this party would win. The man said Eleanor was right when he said it was too early to judge, but here was another question. Why did the Count have that look on his face? Count Schuberg realized that during the Civil War, foreign trade becomes the basis of politics. In addition, regardless of which party the goods were sent to, they would become strategic resources for their side. It was for this reason that Eleanor and his men had to be careful, If the faction he was trading with collapsed, economic revenge would be inevitable. Eleanor knew that the Ilfenom Union, with whom the young man had recently been in contact, had expressed its intention to do business with the royal party, and the predominant Republican Party was currently losing ground, as the royal party had been doing its best to do so lately. Eleanor realized that the two parties were confronting the Republicans at the last stand. Guild messengers informed the man that the royal party was preparing a major war to retake the capital. It seemed that the course of the war had been turned, but whether or not the royal party could win this war. A new day came, and Irina put on a beautiful blue dress and went down to the dining room for breakfast. While they were eating, the man asked the girl what stopped her from wearing a horrible bonnet on her beautiful hair. But Irina recognized that since today was her day off and she decided to spend it the way she wanted, she took a napkin so she wouldn't get dirty. To top it all off, she didn't think her headdress wasn't horrible. Eleanor then asked Belle what she would do on her long-awaited day off. The girl admitted that she wanted to rest today. Irina was enthusiastic. She said she had been working very hard the last few days, and then asked if he had seen the new curtains in the living room. The girl said she had done everything from start to finish, from taking them down to weighing them. The beauty noticed that the setting, namely the interior, looked gloomy and in some places very horrible. But the problem was not with the objects and things that were around, but with the people who worked there. The man, however, listened to the girl's words and said that he should definitely give her a raise. At this, they ended their conversation and started eating. The girl happily tasted the delicious chicken and veal, which made her happy. But then something happened that the girl didn't like. Instead of another meat dish, they put a plate with salad in front of her. Eleanor felt that his girlfriend needed a nibble and a salad. But here was the problem. The girl didn't like vegetables much. She felt sorry for the rabbits who ate only leaves every day. So the girl put aside the plate with the salad. Now she tried to distract the young man and asked him if he had seen a brown rabbit in the garden. The man admitted that he had not. Eleanor realized that the girl had dressed up like this a long time ago. So now he asked the girl if she wanted to go out with him. The man offered to give the girl a tour of the Schuberg Guild headquarters. Irina got excited and said she would love to go on the tour with him. To the place of destination, the girl decided to get on horseback. She felt at this moment free and happy. She enjoyed their walk very much. Irina mentally begged Count Schuberg's forgiveness for the fact that she was now overjoyed, but at the same time refused to ride in the carriage the man had prepared for him. And so they found themselves in the harbour of the city of Shane. The girl felt happy, as it had been too long since she had ridden a horse, so it was quite pleasant to ride. The man was silent and gave the man at the wharf coins to look after their horses. The young man reflected that he was pleased by the fact that she was at least riding very well. Irina didn't really like his wording, but nevertheless she said that riding a horse was a lot of fun, and that made the man think that the girl enjoyed everything she did, and that made her special. Belle thought for a moment. It was the first time she had heard such a thing, since often the people around her said she was arrogant. They walked along the wharf, and Eleanor talked about how he had realized at one time that she had studied the Elysian language because it was very interesting to her. Though he remembered that she had said at the time that she had been fooled by her teacher's appearance, her face had always expressed naive excitement. Irina agreed with that. The girl confessed that during her studies at the academy, she was most interested in Illis literature, and she didn't like the language itself very much. Her love for it came much later. Eleanor also realized that these were the most difficult times of his life, but there was something that was different. The young man was aware, as many others could warmly recall their school years, only because Irina had studied there and socialized with them. For at that moment in their lives, the girl was shining very brightly and beautifully and appealingly. Eleanor understood that the girl had been visiting the port quite often in recent months. He understood that this was where she had been teaching the children. Irina didn't understand how to answer a question that wasn't even a question in its essence. The Count asked the girl if she taught the Elysian language here, but she surprised him a little by saying that she taught the children to learn the Ilfenom language. Irina informed the young man that the Elysian language was not particularly popular in this port. Everyone here wanted to learn Ilfenomian, but for the time being, trade was too much restricted due to the civil war. Ilfenom is a very important trading partner of Kiesel, and many families of sailors and merchants lived in the port. Irina realized that people didn't really trust the girl at first, so she asked the young man about the fact that did she really look that stupid. The girl didn't understand why people didn't think she looked unworthy of respect. But here, Eleanor realized that most likely in most people's minds, she looked like someone who had never experienced hardship. The girl exhaled. She said that people changed their minds once she showed her diploma from the academy, even though she hadn't studied Ilphonomian there. After all, even after 8 years, only scions of titled families were allowed to study at the academy. The girl didn't understand why everyone adhered to outdated principles. Eleanor said that there was still a large number of nobles living in Kisela, steeped in the glory of bygone days, but still preserved today. And those who didn't follow all those tired old rules sold and bought noble titles. So the man was okay with the fact that the rules of the academy went against the times, but nevertheless thinking like Irina was a very special thing. Suddenly, Irina stopped and asked Eleanor how he would feel about her going back to teaching languages on her day off. The girl admitted that she wanted to give him back at least some of the money, at least the smallest part, because she repented a little that the young man helped her for nothing. And the guy suddenly realized that she had many strong and brave sides. But the young man did not understand whether the girl, because of her courage and bravery, has already forgotten about what happened to her not so long ago in this very port. The man exhaled. He said that the girl had told him herself that the day off was too short. He didn't understand how she was going to manage everything in one day. The girl admitted that she was joking, but the point was that she also wanted to bargain about the terms of their interaction. Irina was also very aware that she had gotten more than she could count on at this point. But the young man said he would think about her request. And then he offered her a tour of his trade alliance's warehouse, for the ship from Illis had arrived only a few days ago, so there was plenty to see. So Eleanor led Irina to the warehouse, and the girl's eyes glazed over with delight when she was there. The girl ran up to the items in front of her. She realized she was in the largest union warehouse in Kissel. She noticed some very interesting items, and she asked the man about the fact that these items were most likely not from Ilyssus. Eleanor recognized her correctness and said that these goods came from the Eastern continent. Irina asked about the fact that these goods were from the Eastern continent, which the merchants had sold to Ilyssus. And that was because trade in the East was not very developed. It was too far to get there from Kaisel. The risk was too high too, so that sea route was not in demand. The man admitted that he had bought similar goods from Ilyssus quite often, but it was also a distant country, but not as distant as Kissel, nor as distant as the Eastern continent. The girl continued to look at the items and said she felt they were very strange antiques. She was examining a Chinese vase that she thought looked very expensive. Eleanor realized that this ceramic Chinese vase was used by Eastern royal families. Therefore, it was perhaps the most expensive item in this warehouse. A man reported that the price of antiques and luxury goods was determined by the merchant himself. The more expensive the item, the more popular it was. This made rich people spend a lot of money to satisfy their sophisticated desires. The Count realized that some of them knew the true value of these items, but at the same time he realized that she had a unique vision that allowed her to know the value of an item at a glance. The girl asked Eleonora to listen to her. She thought that the man had no right to speak so cynically about the people who provided his income. After looking around at everything in the warehouse, the girl asked about where they would go now, perhaps to the Union headquarters. Eleanor didn't know, but he was curious to hear what she wanted to see now. The beauty admitted that it had been a long time since she had last seen the sea, so it seemed like a good idea for her to have a look at it. And so they came to the sea. The girl looked carefully at the water and asked the man about why he thought the sea had so many different colors. He said that each shade in the water is responsible for a different depth. The man noticed that each color had a different depth, so the light reflected from the eye would also change. If the depth was too deep, nothing would be seen. The girl suddenly realized that he seemed to be talking about the sea, but the same could be said about people. The young man said that when he was a child, he was as curious as the girl. At that time, he did not want to get involved in conflicts and be beaten, so he often came here. Irina suddenly realized that when Eleanor had been a child, he had always seen that black sea. She wondered what he was thinking at those moments. The man, on the other hand, said that although he was interested in seeing the sea, he felt it was necessary to get closer to it. After all, there were several good boats here. So Eleanor led Irina to one of the ships that were moored at the dock and about to set sail for Sapiens. The man explained that the captain and his crew had to wait for the wind to be able to sail, but before they did, they were obliged to load all the necessary goods on board. As this vessel belonged to the Count, he invited the girl to come aboard and have a look around, for which he held out his hand to her. Irina stared mesmerized at the young man's hand extended to her. After a brief thought, the girl grabbed the young man's hand and started up the gangway to the ship. And now they were already on board the ship and looking at the picture that was unfolding around them. At that moment, the man threw his cloak over the girl's shoulders, for he knew that the sea winds were very cold. But Darina felt fine, so she was more worried about Eleanor than herself, so she asked if he was cold. The Count decided not to fall in the dirt, so he said that he liked warmth, but it turned out that he grew up to be quite a cold person, so he asked her not to worry as he was fine. Irina realized that although she was now in high spirits for most of their walk, at this rate the man intended to ruin everything soon. At that moment, a scene caught their attention where a little boy ran up and hugged his father with a loud, joyful cry. The man worked on this ship and was now loading goods, so at first he was pleased at his son's behavior, but then he saw Eleanor looking at them, and his face changed. The employee panicked and tried to hide from the boss's gaze behind a box he was carrying. Irina was no longer interested in the little family and turned away from them and looked at the sea. The man, on the other hand, asked his child not to make that kind of noise again while he was working, and Earl realized once again that people always have a fear of danger. The young man knew that all people without exception experience fear. It was their nature, and there was nothing to be done about it. Now the Count knew that the ship was moored, but because of the waves it continued to rock leisurely. The girl stood at the side of the ship and looked down at the waves. Both he and she realized that all the crew members of the ship were children who didn't know the difference between heaven and earth. Especially this trait always showed itself in Irina at the most unexpected moments, and now she leaned so low over the side that she was about to fall into the water. Eleanor felt some danger. He bit his lip, as he didn't want to scare the girl away from him, but he couldn't stand it, and with a slight movement of his hand, he straightened her up and pressed her against him. The man explained her act logically. He told her not to lean so low over the side, for if the ship swayed even a little more violently on the waves, she would easily fall into the water. The girl still reacted rather inadequately. She pushed the man away and gave him a slap on the wrist, even though he repeated that he only did so because the situation looked very dangerous. She looked at the young man and said that he was the kind of person who did whatever he wanted and then only apologized to others. But the young man did not pursue the subject and remarked that the ship was soon going to sail. And the girl was as usual not satisfied with such a quick change of subject. Eleanor added serenely that they could stay on the ship if that was what she wanted. But the thing was, if they stayed on board, she wouldn't see Kiesel for months. This information surprised the girl very much. The Count explained that if the captain and the boatswain knew the route well, they would be able to return home within 3 months. But he was not so sure, for this particular ship was bound for the southern continent. Having said all this, the young man interrogated the girl as to whether she wished to remain aboard this vessel. Irina had not yet answered anything to this question, but had only asked the man how much it would cost her to buy such a large ship if she had the money and ability to do so. Eleanor thought for a moment, and then said that the full amount of her debt should have been enough to buy 1 ship of that type. The girl had not expected the ships to be so expensive. The young man remained silent, as he was surprised that the girl at that moment was not worried about the debt he had mentioned. Irina quoted someone else and said that only positive thoughts could make her life happy. It turned out to be a quote from the preface of one of her favourite books. After that, she realised that the Count was a very rich man, and asked how many more of these big ships he had. She also wondered why they were sailing to the south. The man explained that they were now sailing for new goods. The girl was surprised that they had to use as many as 3 ships for that. But it was simple. The man was going to buy more different items. The Count could not tell the exact number of purchases. He only knew that there must be a lot of goods this time. Besides, he wasn't sure if all 3 ships would make it back home. Of course, he hoped they would be safe, but the sea was the sea. And then the young man asked a very strange question to the girl. He asked which party she thought would win the Ilfenom civil war. Irina looked at the guy with a very strange look and asked about whether the guy thought she looked like an astrologer. The man said that even astrologers do not know this information, for the constellations foretell various calamities or good fortune or bad luck in affairs, and also indicate the paths of ships. Eleanor informed the girl that not so long ago, during the Ilfenom Civil War, the royal party had won a victory. It was hard to believe, but the prospect of restoring the monarchy prevailed. So, throughout history, Ilfenom has been the most important market of Kiesel. One day, the union would have to choose a trading partner to get a more lucrative position in the future. This was going to be a chess piece in the hands of the royal party. The girl wondered about the one who was going to bet on such an uncertain situation. She, on the other hand, didn't know much about the strategies, almost anything, for these people could really take back the capital. But she also realized and knew that they had no power to stop something like this, no matter how hard they tried to stop the rising tide. The girl smiled. She understood that people, although they realized that they could not stop the wave, but they always hope that they can do it. But Irina also knew that compared to others, Eleanor was someone who would definitely be able to rise above the flow of this era's wave. The girl believed it and compared him a bit to her father, who also tried to keep up with the times, but that one specifically screwed up so badly. Such a comparison made the young man laugh a great deal and made the girl a little angry, for she knew that many houses had gone bankrupt because of trying to keep up with the times. Eleanor looked at her laughing. He wasn't laughing because of that, but for another reason. Belle was angry. She didn't understand why the Count started laughing, since she didn't have many heart-to-heart conversations with anyone. The man decided to surprise and embarrass her finally. He said it was because he liked her quite a lot. The girl used to be someone who couldn't just peacefully keep up with the times, but the young man always liked the fact that she could think freely. But the girl did not finish listening to the Count, for in the crowd of people on the wharf, she saw Ludwig and wanted to run up to him, but the man stopped her by the arm. Eleanor looked intently into the girl's eyes and told her not to go and leave him alone. The girl stared intently into the man's eyes and didn't understand why he was holding her and asking her not to leave. The young man told the girl that she could not leave him now, for she had to pay for all the favors he had rendered her. Eleanor decided to go all the way and said he would not let her leave him. Such behavior seemed abnormal to the girl, so she asked him to come to his senses and let go of her hand and start behaving like an adequate person. But here was a man who wasn't going to do that and continued to hold her hand, but also coldly stared at the man who stood across from them. Ludwig and Eleanor stared at each other intently, conducting a sort of duel with their gazes. The Viscount at this moment recalled a fragment from his past and realized that he was now being overwhelmed by quite strong and familiar feelings. And then the Count smiled in the way he had 8 years ago, which sent a chill down his spine, for the Viscount realized that the situation was now different. Eleanor, too, remembered those very times. But then, 8 years ago, the Count had smiled and watched Irina leave with the Viscount. But now he would not allow her to leave with her lover. Therefore, it was now that Count Schuberg realized that the Viscount needed to be more careful with the things that belonged to him, and also the latter needed to build up his strength. Eleanor realized that weak people would always be left with nothing, always have everything taken from them that didn't belong to them. Irina tried to pull her hand out of the man's grasp and was angry that she was failing, realizing that she couldn't pull her arm out as the man was much stronger than her. So she screamed and asked the man in raised tones what was happening to him, why he would behave like this. Eleanor admitted that he was now indulging in memories from their shared school past, a situation he had never liked. At that moment, the girl suddenly realized that because of the young man's incomprehensible jealousy, she could not now even say hello to the man she liked, that she could not do it without his permission. Irina hadn't expected that the young man was going to treat her like that, and after that she swung her free hand to slap him on the cheek. But Eleanor not only did not let go of the girl's hand, but now that she swung, he stood motionless. The impression was that the boy was expecting punishment for his behavior. Somehow Irina suddenly realized that Eleanor wanted to say with this kind of behavior that it didn't matter even if he was about to be hit. Irina now realized that the Count was no longer the boy from the academy, which classmates stomped on his hands, and not the child who always kept silent and did not respond when he was maliciously joked about or openly laughed in his face. The beauty's hand trembled and she clenched it into a fist, about to drop it, so she had one question in her mind, why she was so weak in front of him. And Eleanor suddenly realized that the girl, as always, couldn't tell the difference between a weak man and a strong one. But right now she could feel either sympathy or compassion, or it was a momentary confusion. The Count, however, realized that this was enough for now, so he began to remove his jacket. He took it off and threw it over the girl's shoulders, and decided that everything else would be taken care of like a true gentleman. The man buttoned the buttons carefully and realized that the girl had to gradually get used to and accept him. Then Eleanor looked straight into Ludwig's eyes. The young man opened his mouth, started to pivot back, and stumbled a little with worry. And then the Viscount turned and began to run away, leaving Irina and Eleanor to continue standing on the dock. Count Schuberg was not going to hide his tactics from outsiders and from Irina herself. He was ready to become a real villain, as well as to become an even more despicable and despicable person. For he understood that if a man sought what did not belong to him, he was bound to make such a sacrifice, and then to dig a hole, using all the weakest points that could only be found in the enemy, while using all the methods available in his arsenal. A new day had dawned. Eleanor met with Irina as usual. He decided to make small talk and asked the girl if it was true that she had met her father late last night before coming home. The girl stood looking at her lord, not understanding why he was calling her father father, as if they were related by blood. Irina admitted that yes, she had travelled to visit the Marquise, so she was now thanking the young man for taking good care of the elderly man. And then the butler decided to burn all of Irina's plans, as he informed his master that she said she was going to take a break during the day and rest, since she worked on her day off yesterday. Belle turned around and glared angrily at Hans as she regarded him as a chatterbox and a traitor, as she was well aware that now her plans were most likely over. Eleanor, however, surprised her a little, and told her that she did not need to ask the butler's permission to take a break from her work and go out. After all, if she needed to rest, she could feel free to do so at her own discretion, what and how she wanted. But Irina objected as always, but Eleanor also stood his ground. The Count didn't stop. He said that he was insanely annoyed when a girl had to ask strangers for permission on such matters. Irina suddenly realized that this was the form in which her former classmate had informed her that he wanted her to ask permission on such matters, only from him. The young man didn't mind her going out, but at the same time he was concerned about where exactly she was going to go, so he bluntly asked about it. The girl remained silent and only looked at him angrily, and the man was already asking if there was anything he should know about her. Irina remembered the way the young man had behaved with her at the wharf, and she hadn't liked it then, so now she was boiling with anger and realized that if he behaved like that again, she would do something to him. At this moment, Eleanor noticed that yesterday, not on purpose, but hurt the girl's hand. So now he went down on one knee and kissed the wounded place on his hand, and afterwards said that he understood everything, but at the same time asked the girl to hurry back home. So Irina dressed up, even picked up a hat with wide brim to match her dress and went outside, going to go on the road before the Count changed his mind. Then she waved her hand to the other maids who had gone out to see her off, and said that she would be back soon. Suddenly, she heard the clatter of hooves and a carriage approaching behind her. Standing beside the carriage was a handsome young man who bowed courteously and introduced himself as Geron. The man informed the girl that Count Schuberg had ordered him to escort her to the Viscount's house and back, and to see that nothing happened to her. Irina realized that she had no other choice but to agree to such company, so they had been riding in complete silence in the carriage for some time. She was looking out the window, then at her companion. Geron was the first not to start a conversation either, but sat silently and smiled very politely at the girl, but it did not have the proper effect on her. The beauty knew very well that so far many people called Ludwig a Viscount. But here was the curious thing. This guy did not belong to either the old or the new aristocracy, so it was strange that he used the same address to her lover as the nobles. She realized that Eleanor's company was very large, bringing in such huge profits, so it couldn't be made up of people who only did paperwork. After all, the Count could touch even dirty money or engage in political intrigue without any hesitation if he needed to. So now she drew one logical conclusion in her opinion, that all the people who accompanied her to Ludwig's house showed how well they had been trained in everything by their master. Irina sighed heavily. She could not understand only one thing, why there were so many very frightening personalities around her former classmate. And then the silence was interrupted by Geron. He asked her if she thought that their master had a bad temper. The man smiled understandingly at the girl, for he knew firsthand how difficult it was to simply be in the same room with the Count at times, for he was a real stale, dry man. The interlocutor admitted that he met the young man a long time ago, when he was still a teenager and went to the academy. It was then that he had the honour and opportunity to take care of the young future Count. Then the lad found him in a barn where a knight or mercenary was cleaning his sword. He boldly approached him and said he wanted Geron to do something for him. The man didn't understand what was going on and assumed the boy needed an adult to do him a small favour. But the man objected and said it had nothing to do with a favour. The kid phlegmatically continued and said that he hadn't believed in human kindness for a long time, which is why at that moment the kid wanted to make perhaps the first deal of his life rather than ask for a favour. Then the kid promised the grown man that a day would come in the future when he would have the influence, money and power to make an ally, an aristocrat. The man remembered that he had agreed and taught the boy a few simple skills so that he could protect himself if he was in danger. So now the man thought that this approach to the matter could also be considered caring. Irina suddenly realised that this man might have known Eleanor even before the moment he was accepted into the Count's family. Geron agreed with this statement and added that this was what made his relationship with the Lord very private and more open. Belle realised that if this man was telling the truth, then he had known Eleanor when he was wandering and living on the streets. Now she understood why her interlocutor did not look like an aristocrat. Geron went on and on about how Eleanor had looked very pretty indeed as a child, like a strange flower, but his temper had been very bad even then, more like a rattlesnake. Since then, though, some aspects of their lord's personality had become more appropriate, but he was still too straightforward. The man brooded that for the person who touched the Count's body in one way or another, that day would be the last day of his life. This was the line that made Irina join the conversation. She asked the man if their master disliked touching himself so much. Geron thought and answered that it was so, because the Count was irritated by even the most ordinary communication with other people. That's why he was so unsociable, except for working moments. Irina could not believe it and thought that she was just being played. The man was somewhat offended, as lying in such a matter was, in his opinion, unnecessary foolishness and a waste of time. If one thought and observed Eleanor, one would have noticed that the atmosphere immediately around her was also becoming quite gloomy because of it. She should have noticed that even though the young master was a nobleman, he always dressed alone. Geron thought that there was even a little hatred of other people in the Count, as well as his straightforwardness. In a word, he did not understand where this young man got such a character. But what he knew for sure was that the Count had been like that since his childhood. Irina, on the other hand, did not understand the purpose of her escort saying all this about their master. The man, however, said that there was no hidden agenda in all of his words, as Eleanor did indeed have many foolish qualities. He simply wanted to convey the message that this man's childhood had been far more ruthless than other aristocrats might assume. The girl, however, had a completely different opinion on the matter. She believed that a terrible childhood did not give a person the right to treat other people rudely and inhumanely. She did not want to insult Eleanor in any way, even though she was angry and offended. So she felt it was not worth it to brood before her and defend Eleanor with such tearful speeches like this. Further, they rode in complete silence until they reached their destination. When they got off the carriage, Geron told the girl that he would wait for her outside. Irina didn't care whether he went with her or not. She headed for the door of the mansion anyway, and the man waved at her. The doors to the house were open, and Irina entered the room without any effort. Ludwig froze in place with a basin of water and a towel, not expecting to see her here. He didn't let his burden out of his hands and asked the only question was what she was doing at his house. Irina was saddened, as she didn't expect to hear something like that from her lover, so she explained that she had come today, since she hadn't even been able to go up to him and say hello that time at the marina. The Viscount asked the girl to sit down, made tea and poured it into cups. The man showed hospitality, but was not in a hurry to start the conversation, so the girl started it. She asked the young man if she understood correctly that he went to the doctor yesterday, and he did not deny it. According to the behaviour of her lover, the girl realised that he was angry with her, although openly, and does not talk about it. After a pause, the young man asked what made her think that way. The girl sadly lowered her eyes and said that she thought that way because the man had just left yesterday without saying a word. Apparently, this was not so far from the truth, for the young man did not answer, but clenched his teeth harder and harder. This made Irina feel guilty, and she started to panic, saying that she didn't mean to offend him, but the man abruptly interrupted her half-heartedly. And afterward, Ludwig looked intently at his beloved and said that she should not come to this house again. They should not see each other again on principle, as it would be better for everyone. There was silence in the room. The tea was steaming in the cups, and the man and the woman sat motionless in their seats. Irina was taken aback by such a statement and asked if she had heard everything correctly. Where to? Deep down, the girl realized that all this was not an evil joke, and the guy was talking quite seriously, but she did not want to believe it. She did not understand how her lover could send her to a man whom he considered bad, almost a monster. At the mention of the Count, the Viscount became furious. He pounded his fist on the table, knocked over his teacup, and screamed about how their former classmate could give a girl so much more than him, do things he could never do. Ludwig continued. He knew full well that the girl's father wanted similar things, even if it did look like she was selling herself. Irina exploded too. She wanted to be with Ludwig, even if she would regret it later, because all people in this world regret something. Besides, she had never been afraid of anything like that. But the problem was that it was Ludwig himself who feared it all. Irina had no idea what to say or how to behave in such a situation, so she stood up, took her hat, and said that she would first get some fresh air, and then they would continue this conversation. As she walked toward the door, her lover lowered his head and said he was sorry things had turned out the way they had that day. The girl didn't understand her young man, as he hadn't done anything wrong, but he was apologizing anyway, and now he grabbed her quite hard by the shoulder. So she turned around and looked at him, and then he did something that greatly surprised and offended the girl. After this unpleasant incident, Irina left the Viscount's house and headed towards the carriage, where Jeron was already waiting for her. The man noticed the girl's condition, especially her swollen lips with a small abrasion. The attendant became agitated and started asking the girl what happened, as her hand was even trembling slightly from worry. Irina did not answer, which caused a new attack of anxiety in Jeron. He asked her again about what happened to her, and was ready to grab his sword and go to punish her abuser. But she continued to remain silent, so the man informed her that since she wasn't saying anything, he would go to the house himself and find out. At that moment, the girl came to life, grabbed his arm, and prevented him from carrying out what he had planned, and asked him to leave here as soon as possible. Irina claimed that she was fine and nothing was wrong, so she asked the man to take her home as soon as possible. Jeron objected to her, as he realized that it was his duty to protect the girl from all sorts of dangers. But Irina had a different opinion. She believed that this situation was her own private affairs, to which no one else had anything to do. She was a little upset, as she realized that she most likely looked very bad in the eyes of the people around her. Nevertheless, she was fine, and added that the man was bad at reading people. The man did not know what to do, for he could not lie, and he had yet to meet the Count. The girl was trembling, and yet she asked him not to do anything, but just to take her home. They returned to the Count's estate. Irina was sitting on the bed in her room, staring at one point. The maid had brought her hot tea. Irina was silent and sad. The maid wished her a good rest and hurried away so as not to disturb her rest and recovery. Irina thought back to what had happened at Ludwig's house. When she was about to go out for some air, he had pressed her against the door, grabbed her face and squeezed her chin. He had ignored the fact that he was hurting her and making her uncomfortable, even though she had said she didn't like what he was doing. The girl demanded, even in such a situation from the young man, an answer to her question, and she needed a full and clear answer, so she did not like his silent and rude behavior at all. Ludwig then released her, but continued to stand silently in front of her and stare at the work of his hands. And then the realization came to the man of what he had just done. So in a gesture of despair, he covered his face with his hands and moaned. Ludwig asked Irina to leave, even though it wasn't essentially her fault that he snapped. But the young man claimed that he couldn't think straight, so they wouldn't be able to have a conversation. Now, Irina sat there angry, because she thought that her lover should have apologized to her, not sent her away without any explanation or apology. The longer she thought about it, the angrier she became. The door to her room remained open, and the girl didn't even notice Eleanor appear in the doorway. The man took quick steps towards the girl. He was concerned about her condition, since she hadn't even checked the door to her room. So he wanted to check on her, how she was feeling. And then, without further words or emotion, he sat down next to her, causing her mute surprise, as she had not expected anything like this in the situation. But after a minute, Irina came to her senses and indignantly declared that he had sat down without permission on her bed. He paid no attention to the remark, as he didn't care about the bed as such. But the girl's wound did, so he touched her face, and the girl twitched a little as she was in pain. Eleanor continued to look at her with concern and asked if she had already taken her medicine or not. She didn't understand how anyone could need medical attention for slightly swollen lips. The man touched his finger lightly to her lips and said that any other normal man in his place would have been furious, because today, some scoundrel, whose name was Ludwig, had taken and scratched a thing that belonged to him and liked it very much. Now Irina was already angry at the Count, since he had rashly called her a thing instead of a person. Eleanor tried to explain to the girl what he meant. He didn't really mean to call or compare her to a thing or an object. He was just trying to tell her in this clumsy way that he cared about her. So he asked her not to make her body suffer, because it wasn't all worth it. Eleanor admitted that there weren't many things in his life that he truly cherished. So he warned the girl that he would probably be much angrier than the average person in a situation like this. Irina finally began to understand his train of thought, but nevertheless asked him if it was so difficult to ask her what had happened to her today, and then ask her to be more careful in the future, instead of all this. And his tone could use a change from harsh to a calmer one. After all, at this and other moments he looked like a very strange young man because of his poor social skills. The girl then sighed and said that if that was the end of it, she would be most grateful if he would leave her chambers and leave her to herself. The Count, however, was in no hurry to leave. He remained silent and looked at the girl. He knew perfectly well that she had gone to meet her beloved man and had risked her own life for his sake. But what she got in return was out of line. Her eyes were swollen with tears now, and she was generally very sad about the situation. So he called the girl by name again. She was angry and asked him what else he wanted from her now. Eleanor said he hoped that one day the girl would be able to open her heart and soul to him. This rejoinder quite aroused and embarrassed the girl, and she asked what had come over the young man and what he meant. And then Eleanor leaned very close to her face and asked if it was so hard for her to give him even one single chance to win her over. For a minute they both froze and were silent, and then the girl started pushing the guy away from her, patting him with her palm and saying that since he was born so smarmy, he should be responsible for it, and asked him not to say such things anymore. And the Count looked slyly at his guest again, and said that as soon as she had finished beating him, let her think hard about his last words. He made the girl very uncomfortable, so she started shoving him off her bed, saying that he was very noisy, so it was time for him to leave. Eleanor, however, decided that he had enough of teasing the beauty for now, so he decided to leave her chambers, but at the very door he turned to her and wished her pleasant dreams. Morning came, and Irina had to resume her maid duties. She was trying to wash the blanket she had trampled over in the soapy water in the garden, and she was very angry. Her bad mood was caused by Ludwig's behaviour after their quarrel, for he had been slow to apologise to her, so she was now calling him the last curses she knew. Among other things, she also fined the desperation with which he covered his face with his hands, so she was worried about what he was going to do now, how he was going to fix the situation. Irina wondered if the young man was going to avoid seeing the girl for the rest of his life. She thought that her beloved should have come to her first, and then apologised to her, since it was he who had offended her, not she her. This is exactly how the situation should have unfolded, but things turned out completely differently. Eleanor walked past the girl and at first didn't want to approach her, but then he realised that she was puffing with anger and rage like a hedgehog. But still he decided to approach her. She didn't see him coming, so she was surprised and frightened when he stood behind her and asked if she was cold. Irina started to calm down and said that she was fine, so he shouldn't worry about her. The Count looked at the girl's feet and noticed that they had turned red from the cold. He didn't like that even on a hot day she couldn't wash the poor blanket in warm rather than cold water. The beauty stood and answered nothing, so the man decided to take matters into his own hands. So he lifted her in his arms, not letting her torture herself in the cold water any longer. This embarrassed the girl, so she asked her former classmate what he was doing now. The Count advised her to stop resisting and sit quietly in his arms, because even if he continued, he still wouldn't let her go. The man wondered if the girl didn't feel any fatigue from such behavior, and she mumbled that she would continue to fight as he was a maniac. Still, she did not break free again, and the young man carried her without adventure and set her down on the steps that most likely led into the house. After that, he went down on one knee in front of her and took one of her feet in his hands. Irina was silent and did not twitch at this moment. The Count realized that the girl's feet, after the cold water, had become almost icy to the touch. At that moment, Eleanor looked intently into his guest's eyes and asked her not to act in such a rash manner again. This situation made the man remember and think of things he didn't like. He was almost certain that the girl had no idea that he wildly disliked cold in any of its manifestations. The young Earl knew from personal experience that after being out in the cold for so long that it sent shivers down to the bones, the body could become so numb that it began to stop feeling pain. Sometimes he hoped such sensations would leave his body, his memories, and his head. But Eleanor realized that in a situation where Irina would suffer from such cold, if she had to suffer, just as he had as a child, he knew that it would make the existing world wrong. Strange as it was, that was the thought that kept running through the man's mind. He was well aware that even if he wanted to take off all his clothes and give them to her to save her life, the only thing he could give her was his coat. It was frustrating for the young man to have two such different and contradictory ideas dwelling in his mind, so he had no idea which one would eventually prevail over the other. And then from the inner pocket of his jacket, he took out a silk handkerchief and began to rub and warm the girl's feet. Although the girl had not expected such actions and was a little embarrassed, but still she remembered that handkerchief and was even more surprised. It was the same handkerchief she had given him 8 years ago, and as it turned out, the Count had carefully kept it all that time. But she still didn't understand why he hadn't thrown it away and still had the item. At this point, the girl began to reflect on the fact that this man had proposed marriage to her as many as 3 times. But he had never once asked her whether she loved him or not. The girl knew very well that every word had a certain power, so when a person hears the answer to his question, he can no longer pretend that nothing is happening, as a sense of responsibility arises. She did not know what she could answer the man if he asked her directly, as she herself did not understand the emotions that were deeply hidden in her heart. But nevertheless, she also realized that it was all a lie. Irina thought that both she and he would have a much easier and calmer life if he had let her go to all 4 sides, because his ruthless heart needed a rest. Some time had passed since that day, and Ludwig wrote and sent Irina some letters with apologies, so the girl wanted to erase all the memories of that ill-fated day of their quarrel, but everything was not so simple. And here she was again, sitting at the same dinner table with Eleanor, but she couldn't even get a bite down her throat for thinking. She suddenly realized that her relationship with Ludwig would no longer be the same, as it was impossible to go back in time and fix their relationship history. Eleanor, on the other hand, was in good spirits, though he was studying some papers even as he ate. He asked her with a smile what her plans were for the day. Irina thought for a moment, and then said she wanted to learn how to garden, and after that to do laundry, and if she had time left, she planned to do something else. And then, out of the blue, she threw a grenade, saying that she planned to marry Ludwig. At these words, Eleanor clenched the papers in his hands until they gnashed. Irina was going to do this, with plans to continue working in the Count's house, and promised that her personal life would not affect or interfere with her work in any way. The girl was well aware that everything around her was slowly falling apart. This included the monarchy, feudalism, the bankruptcy of her family, her estranged friends, and her long-time love. She finally realized that everything in this life comes to an end, the good and the bad. But for all that, she was sure she would do anything to keep Eleanor out of her life. And then the Count took the floor. He said that Irina had made a fatal mistake, as she did not realize that she had come to work in his house not for money, and their employment relationship could not be called ordinary. Therefore, she could not do everything she wanted to do. The beauty thought she was right when she thought he was going to shackle her and keep her locked up. The Count himself had already begun to approach her, saying that he had paid a huge debt on her behalf, as well as taking care of her father. He also went along with her when she didn't want to give up and let her work as a maid in his house, even though he knew full well it wasn't the right fit for her. He reminded the girl that he had told her once before that if there was no place in her heart for him, he would not claim it again. And that was the only reason why he allowed the girl to see Ludwig and give him money. But he didn't understand Irina, didn't understand and didn't want to accept her pity, after all he had done to her. The man had already leaned in quite close to her and said he understood her hint that it was time for them to end their relationship. But the problem was that he wasn't going to indulge her this time either. So he said he wasn't going to let her marry anyone but him. So the man, without a shadow of a doubt, put the girl to the fact that tonight, or rather at night, he would come to her room, so he advised her not to lock the door. Eleanor calmly left the dining room. Hans followed him. The servants tried to calm her down, but they were not very good at it. The butler followed his master in silence, yet he thought that today was the day he had seen Lady Irina so angry and out of control. But the surprises did not end there. Eleanor asked his faithful servant to arrange a private meeting with Ludwig Fontaine, preferably within the next few hours. The butler did not know what to do, because he understood the impropriety of what was happening. So he asked his master about what he was going to do. But when he did not get an answer, he reformulated the question. Now it sounded like a request. The servant asked him to initiate him at least a little into the course of what was happening, to understand exactly what was required of him. The answer was not in the young Count's style. He said he was going to show the Viscount how bad he could be. Evening came and Irina spent her time pensively in her room, sitting on the edge of her bed. Just at that moment, Eleanor came into the room. The girl took his arrival in stride and said that she had not authorized him to come into her room. The young man took a quick stride across the distance between them and said that this mansion belonged to him. So if you thought about it logically, there wasn't a single place he couldn't enter of his own accord. Irina recognized that he was right about that. The man sat down next to the beauty and said that he had indeed asked her not to lock the door to her room, but he could not understand why she had left it open. Irina looked at him and thought that he was fooling around again. They sat next to each other. Irina admitted that at times the Count made her terribly angry with him, so she was curious whether he was considering the possibility that one day she would hit him hard and painfully in the face, or whether such a development seemed so unlikely to him that he simply ignored it. To top it all off, the girl knew full well that this young man had done too much good for her, so he wouldn't force her into actions she didn't want for one reason or another. And then Eleanor decided to play not the most pleasant card. He said that the lover of the girl is not such a good man as she thinks, because he is not the kind of people who are ready to sacrifice themselves for the happiness of others and devote their lives to another person. These words greatly angered the beautiful girl. At this point, the girl assumed that the Count might have done something to her favourite person. Eleanor sighed and said that he had done nothing to Ludwig, as people like him were not worthy of his attention, much less that he should waste his energies on them. But still, the man remembered sending one of his men to the Viscount with a proposal, and then saying that he was just giving her unloved one a choice. The Count then slanted his eyes and asked the girl if she was going to go and visit Ludwig. The girl crossed her arms over her chest and confirmed the Count's assumption and said that she had previously informed him that she didn't need a horse or carriage to get from point A to point B. The man knew that nothing good would come of it and told his guest that it was all a bad idea. But Irina didn't understand what he meant and said that she could get there on her own. So, before the development of all these events, the Marquis Nodiac began to look for a suitable candidate for the husband of his only daughter. And then, Eleanor decided to compete for the hand and heart of the young beauty. At their first meeting, he said he would help with the affairs of her house, and if he himself was of no value to the girl, he offered her the use of his money, resources and influence. That plan failed, and Eleanor realized that in this battle he couldn't hope and use his money, as it didn't matter much to the girl at the time. That was when he first realized that this was the side of him and her that was making the people around him miserable. But Irina did not listen to Eleanor, and still went to visit the Viscount, who from the threshold suggested that they end their long and not the happiest recent relationship. The young man confessed that he had recently received a substantial sum of money from the Count, and he intended to receive the same sums further, so he proposed to the girl to part. The man hoped to receive monetary assistance from the Earl until the day Carol made a final recovery. Irina could not believe her ears. It seemed to her that her lover had lost his mind and did not understand what he was doing and saying. But he said that he understood everything perfectly well, asked for her forgiveness, and said that as long as his sister was alive, he wanted to do everything he could for her. The girl, for the first time in her life, realized and felt utter powerlessness. She did not realize how the man she had loved for 8 years, who had said he loved her, could accept this money, how he could betray her and their love, how he could succumb to the force of circumstances and lose. He, on the other hand, knew exactly why she had to work at their former classmate's house, and knows how she had struggled to do her best for the two of them until this very day. Ludwig was well aware of all this, but he chose money over her and treated her in such a terrible way. The girl had no idea how or what she should do now, where to go and how to live her life. But there was nothing more for her to do in this squalid house with this man who had betrayed her. So she wished Ludwig well, turned and walked toward the exit. Irina walked briskly down the street, then stopped abruptly. She remembered what a kind and smiling young man the Viscount had been when they were at the academy. At that time, he was the only person who had been there to support her for a long time. But he had changed a lot, and acted wrong and rude to her, but despite that, she couldn't easily cut him out of her life and throw him in the trash for uselessness. The most unpleasant thing was that even when she realized that there was only a bleak future ahead of her, she still fought for the two of them, thinking that they would always be together, and no adversity could separate them. And in the end, she was left alone with a broken heart, as Ludwig chose the money his rival gave him for his family over their long and bright love. In fact, the girl understood perfectly well that money was not the only reason why the Viscount had broken off their relationship. In fact, he really thought so. He was a kind man in his own way. That's why he decided to leave her and not to drag her down further. But his act devalued all the efforts the girl had made to preserve their relationship. So now she was crying in the middle of a crowded street from the pain in her heart and soul. Ludwig knew full well that while her family had the power, strength and money to control everything that went on around them, all the people around them looked at them, pointed fingers, and said their love was frivolous and superficial. But she really was grateful that her family were Marquises and his were Viscounts. If it was the other way around, she couldn't go against her elders' opinion of ending their relationship. Strange as it may seem, Irina had always believed that it was great luck that through her stubbornness she had been able to get her father to yield to her in this matter. She had always believed that Ludwig would never give her up for some money. She kept crying and crying in the middle of the street and mentally apologized to her former lover. The girl apologized for bankrupting her family and for letting him make such a painful decision, for not realizing how tired he was and wanting to give up. Irina realized that she still loved Ludwig very much, but she couldn't protect their love until the very end. So it was late evening, and Eleanor was sitting at home by the window, reading a book thoughtfully. Taking a break from reading, the Count asked Hans, who had just entered the room, about how Irina was feeling and what she was doing. The man reported that she was still drinking in the tavern. Eleanor covered his eyes and asked the butler to keep his eyes on the girl, as she was not the type of person who would ignore the disrespect of others. Hans realized the nature of his new assignment and was about to leave the room to complete it, when he heard some noise and the sound of breaking glass from the hallway of the house. So the first thing he did was look out into the hallway to check who and what was doing so late at night and disturbing their master. But he froze at half a word. Lady Irina came home. She was drunk and could hardly stand on her feet, staggering from the alcohol she had drunk. She bumped into a vase and broke it into small pieces. The girl, even in such a drunken and not quite adequate form, realized that this vase was not only beautiful, but also very expensive. But what's done is done, and she sat down and wanted to remove the shards of the object. At that very moment, she heard the familiar voice of the Count behind her back, asking her what she was about to do. Irina shifted the focus of her attention and looked up at the gentleman who was approaching her with quick steps. The girl thought about the fact that the young man was going to scold her for ruining one of the expensive luxury items in his house, so she offered to deduct the cost of the vase from her paycheck. Since the beauty was having trouble coordinating, Eleanor helped her into an upright position and told her that since she was so drunk, she should go to her room to lie down and get some rest. But his attempts this time were all failures, as the girl released her hand from his grasp and told him what he would do to her if she didn't want to go to her room and go to bed. Irina had absolutely no control over her words and actions, because in her sober state she wouldn't have stonewalled herself. But now she asked the Count, did he now decide when and why she should go to her bedroom? She staggered again and almost fell, but the young man caught her and held her by the shoulders. Then he added that she could hardly stand on her own feet, and he felt a certain awkwardness that she could not and would not accept even such a small act of kindness from him. Irina bent her line. She accused him of being so sweet, kind and caring, and added sarcastically that everything he said was always true in the last instance. So she seized the opportune moment and slapped the young man with all her might. The girl bore her anger, resentment and sorrow on Eleanor, for neither he nor Ludwig had the right to make her suffer so much for such a mean rupture. Eleanor did not resist. He realized that the girl's action was very justified, as he had a hand in something that she was morally very hurt. She continued to question him, wondering how satisfied he was with the result of his actions. Irina could not understand why the young man was so cruel, why he acted in such a way. Irina was no longer a count, but only clung to his breast, crying quietly and asking why he had treated her so, whether the cause of it all was his sick love he felt for her. The beautiful woman pressed herself more and more tightly against him. She was no longer screaming. Now he was the only one who could hear what she was saying. She asked again if all the little things he did were because of love. She still couldn't believe it. He answered nothing and gave her a chance to vent her feelings. Then she exploded with anger again. She demanded that he look at her carefully and realize what his cruel actions had led to. She didn't understand why it was necessary to present everything to her in this particular way. She didn't understand what the guy wanted from her in the end. Marriage or a one-night stand, because the last time he'd said that once would be enough for him. She didn't understand him, and he didn't answer anything and just stared at her. Clearly, her emotions were speaking in her, and they were telling her some very interesting things. The girl told the man that she was ready for a one-night relationship. Eleanor, who until that moment had stood like a statue and only listened, died down and said that he would do anything she wished. Irina was now trying to backpedal and hoped that if he was a good guy, he would definitely refuse to use this situation in his favor. But here's the trouble. He had always told the girl that he was not the positive hero of her story, and far from a good guy, so he was going to take advantage of the situation. So Eleanor told Irina to go to her room first, and he would come to her a little later. And so it happened. The girl went to her room first, changed into her nightgown and sat on her bed waiting for the Count, who came to her a little later. He realized that he was probably not the kind of man Irina would want to spend the night with, so he said that if she didn't like what was going on now, he could leave her alone and go out. Irina, on the other hand, looked at him carefully and wondered if he was joking again. The girl was silent. She realized that for the first time in her life she was waiting for revenge. So she felt that for the sake of achieving her own selfish goal, she was willing to even hurt herself physically. At that moment, Eleanor began to slowly remove his shirt, standing with his back to the girl, and she watched him silently as he did it smoothly. But she did not understand what the Count was thinking, coming to her room today. The man was standing in front of a mirror, in which his abs were perfectly visible. But Irina's attention was drawn to the marks on his bare back. She suddenly realized that they were scars. The Count, on the other hand, didn't like to show or talk about the marks left on his back, so he threw a blank, nothing much, and continued unbuttoning his shirt buttons. He was tired of showing off in front of the mirror, so he leaned over Irina and asked her if she was uncomfortable with his scars. The girl tried to explain that she didn't mean that. But since those footprints didn't disgust Irina, the young man hoped she could spend a little more time on what they planned to do tonight. So in the same instant, Eleanor flopped the girl on her back on the bed and hovered over her himself. He said that he could catch the subtle odour of alcohol that came from her at that moment. The girl, however, suggested that he not kiss her in that case. Eleanor, on the other hand, chuckled a little at the innocent girl. He said the smell of alcohol was even in her breath, so for a moment Irina held her air to keep from breathing. But it was nothing critical for the man, because he had a good tolerance for alcohol, and the next moment he was already kissing the girl. Morning came. The girl slept sweetly after the day's worries, drinking and a night of love with the hated Count. Eleanor was already awake and could not look at the sleeping beauty. He looked happy and serene at that moment. But Irina had drunk so much the night before that the alcohol still hadn't weathered out of the room and her system. At this point, he didn't care about the smell of alcohol. The man was curious if the girl realized how cute she was. He lay there and remembered that when Irina was younger, and when she laughed, or when she got angry or argued with her classmates because of him, he had always found her very sweet. For a long time, this feeling had been foreign and unfamiliar to him, and at times caused unpleasant sensations in his body. On the day of their graduation, Irina suggested he meet up when they had the right opportunity to do so. He remembered that it was snowing and very cold that day, but even on such a disgusting day, she didn't turn away from him, but instead said goodbye to him. From time to time, the Count recalled that episode of his life. To all this, he was well aware that he was greedy and knew that the girl would most likely never be able to understand and forgive him. But he was painful and sad too, for he had always longed for the girl who slept beside him. Most importantly, he asked for Irina's forgiveness for breaking her love. It wasn't long before Eleanor was the first to get up, cleaned himself up, and was sitting with a cup of tea and reading the newspaper. At that very moment, an excited Hans ran into the man's office and addressed the young man, who had not even broken away from his reading. The butler relayed to Eleanor the information that Lady Irina, when she woke up this morning, she refused to eat breakfast, something that had never happened before. Now, the young man put the paper aside and covered his eyes. He said he heard the butler, and most likely could even understand why the girl was acting like that now. The table in the dining room was as always bursting with various meat and fish dishes, which Irina adored so much. But since she was not going to come down and eat, the Count asked her to put it all away somewhere. Since breakfast was cancelled, the Count immediately got to work. One of his assistants informed him that today he needed to visit their main and biggest stores with an inspection, and the man also needed to have a good look around the capital. At that moment, as he passed one of the windows that overlooked the garden, the young man heard the voice of his guest, who was talking to the gardener, and asked him to look again at the result of her work, as she had not cut the leaves and twigs exactly as he had shown her. Eleanor looked out the window and now saw Irina diligently trimming branches on one of the trees with garden shears, worrying about whether she was doing the job right or not. The old gardener watched carefully as the girl did everything, and he told her for the umpteenth time that she had talent and her own aesthetics. He was even beginning to think that the lady was much better at gardening than he was. Irina was, of course, pleased to hear compliments and praise for her efforts and work, but she realized that she was still far from a professional in this difficult business. The girl was suddenly curious, if this tree could talk, what it would say about his new hairstyle that she had made him, whether it would be quite the result or not. The old man had noticed that today the new lady servant had said and continued to say many strange things since early morning. It was all because the girl herself wanted a new hairstyle and a change of image. Suddenly the girl asked the old gardener if he knew that the women of the eastern continent applied oil made from tree seeds to their heads. She thought such an idea very marvellous and interesting. The man was surprised. He had never once in his long life heard of a tree that could be used for such purposes. In fact, Irina herself did not remember the name of that marvellous tree, as she had heard the whole story a long time ago, so now her memory was failing her a little. Since she had finished pruning the tree, the girl decided to take the branches that were left to the rabbit that had recently been living in their garden. But here was the trouble. She did not know where he was running today, so she asked the gardener if he had seen the animal today. But Irina could not be without adventures, so suddenly she lost her balance and almost fell down the stairs. But she was lucky. She was caught by Eleanor, who had just entered the garden. Irina dropped the garden shears from her hands in surprise, and the Count was already telling her that he thought she would be resting all day this afternoon, not working up a sweat. The man gently embraced her and asked her not to resist, but to come to him. But Irina was in her repertoire and said that since she was a servant in this house, she couldn't afford to stay off work all day and lie in bed. However, she definitely couldn't have the last word. So the Count hugged her again and asked how she was feeling today, since he thought her back was supposed to be hurting, which was why he was suggesting she lie down. Such speeches embarrassed the girl very much, as the gardener and several maids were watching them from around the corner, and Irina thought it impermissible to discuss such things in front of strangers. But Eleanor wasn't conceding this argument to Irina either. He reminded her that last night, drunkenly, she had blabbed it all to everyone herself. The beauty herself realized that the man was absolutely right in everything. So she kept quiet and stood red as a ripe tomato from embarrassment. All this did not hide from the gaze of the Count. As it was, the young man became serious in a flash and asked the girl if she was really going to keep doing all this here. Irina bit her lip and asked a counter-question. Didn't she have to work to pay off her debt? Eleanor was silent and looked at her. He didn't understand why she didn't want to live a much simpler and easier life than she did now, because he could do so much for her. The man looked around. He understood that there were many servants and workers in his mansion who had their own opinions on the situation. He didn't know how to feel about everything that was happening to them. The man understood that the girl didn't want to love him, and only a huge debt bound them together. But he still felt that there was something else that the girl was trying to prove by doing all this. But he was brought out of his musings by the voice of the beauty. She was asking him if they could continue there on all these topics elsewhere, but not here. Eleanor agreed and said that yes, they could talk in a more private setting. He realized that it was uncomfortable for the girl to talk about such topics in the garden. Eleanor, however, was well aware that most of his servants considered Irina to be a very stubborn girl. After all, the servants thought that if she lived the rest of her days in luxury, respect and comfort as a countess, then yesterday's parting from the man she had loved for 8 years, with whom she had been together, would no longer be such a great loss. The man also realized that Irina could also lead the life she had been accustomed to since her youth, if she had become the mistress of some aristocrat with money. But no, she chose the role of a maid and a debtor. The man was not sure that the girl would ever be able to pay him the full amount of her debt. He didn't understand what she was trying to accomplish by living like this and doing all these senseless things. Did she really hope to restore her family to its former glory? Eleanor, being a man, and an earl besides, knew that men considered it shameful to make their women do difficult work. To top it all off, the concentration of wealth was leading to an imbalance of power, a materialism that was beginning to fill a gap in the crumbling status system. The most interesting and scary thing at the same time was that Irina did not accept the value of this time in the world she lived in. Unfortunately or fortunately, there were very few people who could understand all this about the girl. Eleanor realized that it would be foolish to continue talking or pressuring the girl in any way right now, so he said that he had to leave now, but he would return home in the evening and come to her at night, so he hoped she would be waiting for him. He kept his promise, and Irina let him into her room and into her bed. After a good time, the man slept, but Irina could not sleep and sat on the edge of the bed thinking about something. The young man instinctively sensed that something was wrong and opened his eyes, searching for the girl with his gaze. He noticed how a beautiful woman in one thin nightgown went out into the garden and intently began to watch the trees that were there. The girl walked over to the tree she had pruned that morning, touched one of its branches, and asked him if he liked his new hairstyle or not. She was somewhere deep in her thoughts. That's why she didn't hear the footsteps of the Count, who was already standing behind her. She giggled softly. Eleanor thought it was cute and reached out, eager to touch her hair, when suddenly he heard her words to the tree and couldn't reach her. She said that the tree was lucky, as no one could hurt it without its permission. She compared herself to that tree and said that they both needed to stay that way, which was to act and evolve. Irina was sure that she always and under any circumstances had to do whatever it took to survive. Eleanor stood and remained silent, listening intently to what he shouldn't have heard. Irina suddenly realized and began to let go of the situation. She didn't deny the fact that at times she was very angry and even a little hateful and disappointed in Ludwig. To top it all off, she resented Eleanor's overly brash behavior. But now, standing under the night sky and the full moon, she realized that she no longer wanted to hate anyone, much less blame anyone for her problems. She made a promise to herself that the day would come when she would be able to pay off all her debts, even though she would have to work hard and spend a lot of energy on it. At the same time, she realized one fine or not so fine day that money was a very dirty and down-to-earth thing. At some point in her life, Irina realized that she had become disillusioned with life itself too, But now she found the strength to look at the perfect beauty of the world around her and smile. Afterward, she looked up into the night sky and told herself and the tree not to waste precious time worrying about something or someone, because none of this would last, so she couldn't be timid. Now she realized that life was not a continuous comedy. There were negative emotions and tragedies and boredom, but nevertheless, there were still a lot of good things in this world. And it is these good, kind, and positive things that give each of us the strength to go on living. Eleanor stood behind her like a statue and did nothing, though he held his jacket in his hands. At that very moment, the girl turned back and saw the young man who was standing behind her. She was slightly surprised to see him here and now. The man now moved even closer to her and put a warmer article of closet on her. He didn't understand what she was doing here, and even in this form, as it was cold enough to enjoy the breeze in the garden. The girl adjusted the cape, or was it a sweater the Count had given her, and asked him why he had come to see her here. In the man's opinion, it was simple. He woke up and realized that he was lying in bed alone, and she was not there at that moment, so he went to look for her. But he didn't dare tell Irina that he was afraid that something like this might happen to them in the future. It made him feel insecure. The girl, however, admitted that she felt out of place and was a little embarrassed, so she decided to go out into the garden for a while and get some fresh air. Eleanor understood all she had to say, but then he added that Irina was lightly overdressed, and it was quite possible that she might have caught cold, so he suggested that she come inside. But then he thought the girl noticed something, but she quickly turned away and pretended not to see anything. Though the man said nothing to such a thing, still, as they walked toward the house, he glanced back and looked in the same direction as the beauty before him. But to his regret, he saw nothing there, and they went faster into the premises of the mansion. A new day came, and Eleanor needed to work again. This time he was at the headquarters of the trade union. One of the Count's associates noticed that the man wanted a deposit from the Imfelnom trade union. The Count sat at his desk and signed some documents. He replied to the interlocutor's remark that the boat had left Sapieno only a month ago. The aide knew what the chief was talking about and what he was getting at, but he also knew that the price of this deal had been agreed upon and approved in advance. Eleanor remembered that too, so now what he was studying. The Count was undoubtedly worried about whether all the ships would be able to return home from the voyage this time. This information was inaccurate, therefore affecting negatively on further thoughts and transactions. Eleanor reminded Darren that they were dealing with long sea voyages, which was what gave no stability or guarantee of a successful return home. The Count realized that if any of the sailors showed signs of endemic disease during this voyage, but it was not certain that the crew would be able to be replenished in such a remote location. This disease usually manifested itself in sailors and was accompanied by profuse bleeding, loss of teeth one after another for no apparent reason. Darren was now frantically thinking as well. He knew that Party B of their deal wanted to take back all the goods they had bought from them as soon as possible. After all, the problem was that they were living in wartime, which meant a meagre supply of various items. The man was worried that they might lose a major customer if they drew up a very tight contract. Eleanor agreed with the aide and added that it was more likely that their trading partner had already been influenced by royalism. The young man realized that such ideological treatment of the key players would increase the chances of victory in the confrontation of imperialism. Although at the moment, royalism also had a number of advantages. Eleanor suddenly remembered Irina's words to him during their walk in the harbour and ordered Darren to postpone the signing of the contract indefinitely, and consequently the payment of the deposit. A new day came and Eleanor and Irina had breakfast together again. The girl was angry that the boy didn't give her enough, and it seemed to her that she was a real glutton compared to the young man who practically had nothing for her. The Count admitted that although he ate much less than Irina, he was not as choosy about what he ate. He knew that there are two groups of people. One eats and drinks to enjoy the process, and the other eats to survive and nothing more. Irina didn't want to listen to all this, as she thought such thoughts were very strange and wrong. Eleanor explained to the girl the simple truth that the human body was more complex than she realized. He was also interested in learning what nutrition scientists had spent money on over the years. Nevertheless, the man was sure that each of them would be in solidarity with the Count that the beautiful woman should not continue to eat the way she did now. In general, moderate consumption of various foods from different food groups is the only and most correct solution of nutritionists, and it should suit Irina too. Then breakfast passed in complete silence and each was left to his own opinion. The silence was interrupted by Eleanor, who said that he was going to inspect the store and the places where the trade union was investing its money that day. Then he asked the girl to come with him. Irina agreed, since she had the day off anyway, but she hoped it would be fun. But it wasn't fun yet, not at all, from the word go. And so they went into one of the warehouses, and the girl noticed that it was full of poor quality miscellaneous fabric. She didn't understand why Eleanor was collecting all this not-so-good fabric, because such fabric would be hard to sell. There would be hardly anyone willing to get their hands on it. As suddenly she saw a rather strange contraption. She hadn't seen anything like it before, so she curiously asked Eleanor what it was worth that was so interesting. The man came closer and said that the contraption was called a sewing machine, but that didn't tell the girl anything. So the girl looked at him suspiciously and demanded that he tell her in detail what a sewing machine was and what it was for. The young man found the beauty very cute and funny, so he laughed. And Irina looked at him and did not understand why he always laughs with her at such moments. The girl was already starting to get annoyed, so she really demanded to be told everything about the sewing machine. Eleanor laughed and became serious. He said that this was the mechanism people should use to sew clothes. The girl was surprised, for she had not expected to be able to sew clothes on this thing. But it was true, and the man added that so far it was only the first sample. But even it worked much faster than human hands. But the problem was that the developer's life was in danger at the moment, so he decided to offer the company a reasonable price. Why the news that the developer was in danger excited Irina, and she assumed that the man was terminally ill. But this man was not sick. It was simpler. People who were also engaged in sewing clothes set fire to this man's house and workshop because they were afraid that because of his invention they would have no more work and therefore no more income. But he was sure that if the girl wanted to learn how to use the sewing machine, she would be fine. Though Irina realized that the Count was right, she also wondered what he was going to do next, what his plans for the future were. Eleanor planned to change the standards of beauty and clothing in their country in the future, and to make clothes much more accessible to anyone who wanted to buy them. In other words, to create a collection of clothes that would not cost much, but that everyone could buy. The young man wanted to make it so that people would not have to save up money for months or even years to buy new clothes, as the clothes he would offer people would be reasonably priced. But he faced another problem. He wasn't fastidious and very picky about clothes like a girl, so he didn't really understand people's needs in this area. The Count looked a little sad now, for he had no idea whether the people of their country would like his extravagant scheme. Irina also pondered. She had been pondering the young man's problem and idea for a long time. And then after a pause, she informed the guy that it would be quite difficult to realize his plan. Eleanor was interested in her position, so he asked her to tell him more about why it would be difficult for him to realize what he had planned. The girl looked closely at both the fabrics and the sewing machine, and said that people don't want to dress like everyone else. Irina realized that her words to the Count might seem strange and sound rather silly, because most people want to stand out with the help of clothes among the crowd of the same small people, at the same time to look better and more stylish than others. Irina understood that Eleanor was going to do a good deed for the poor, almost poor people. But even girls from poor families always wanted to look dressy, special, so as not to be like others. So they will not wear the same clothes either, even if they are cheap, Irina continued. She said that she understood the Count and his stance and easy attitude towards clothes, but girls are organized differently. For them, their outfits are not just garments. For them, each outfit means much more. So she suggested Eleanor to release 2 or even 4 collections of clothes. She realized that it would cost more, but there would be more profit from them as well. The girl explained that if his idea looked like a sack, not a single self-respecting girl would wear this shabby thing on herself, even under penalty of death. She said that if someone suggested she wear something like that for any reason, she would beat him up and wouldn't even wear something like that for free. Eleanor imagined Irina putting on a sack with holes for her arms and legs, and so he smiled, though there was some rationality in what she said. And then she suggested that the young man should start by making a collection of work clothes, because in this case, even the design would not matter much. Or one could think about designing pajamas or coats. That is, something where size is not particularly important. But Irina was well aware that it was only her personal opinion, so perhaps experts in this field could offer him some other option. The girl also realized that in their day, girls no longer wore lavish ball gowns for every day. As time went on, fashions changed, and women began to favor longer and looser dresses. Irina realized that if such a style gained even more popularity, it would become a source of profit for the Count. Irina was angry because up until now, everyone equaled the royal family in terms of style of dress, which meant that she couldn't create her own style and brand of clothing. But Irina was not left alone by the sewing machine. The girl did not really understand how they would use this mechanism in their work. She saw that there was a knob, so she assumed that it had to be simply twisted. They had lingered and pondered long enough in the warehouse, so now they went out into the fresh air and came to the quay and looked out to sea. And at such a romantic moment, they were spoiled by the picture below. The dead body of a sailor was being carried on a stretcher. He had died of a disease that was spreading among the members of his profession. Irina didn't understand why the disease only killed sailors. Eleanor had said that the sailors themselves believed it was a curse that was placed on all people who sailed. It was strange to realize that someone believed so strongly in superstition. The Count looked at the girl and asked about whether she believed that some obscure curse was to blame. They both realized that such legends were real nonsense. Since they were graduates of the academy, they believed in science, not legends and superstitions. But the problem from life was that diseases like the one that killed sailors were not well or marginally studied. Irina knew from experience how people liked curses of all kinds. Until about 100 years ago in Kiesan, it was believed that people who were born with red hair were bad luck, and it was considered bad luck to be born with such hair. Irina's grandmother held a high position, but she never showed her hair color to anyone, as she understood that she could lose everything because of it. At that moment, Eleanor woke up and said that Irina had very beautiful hair. The girl looked at the young man in surprise and asked if he really thought as he said. The man once again said without a shadow of doubt that the girl's hair was beautiful. Irina smiled and said that she liked her hair color very much. The sun was already beginning to color the horizon orange. After looking at the sea, the man and the woman walked along the city street. They noticed that Kiesan had changed a lot. The man added that these changes had also affected the mansion of the Marquise, which the girl had visited quite often lately. And the beauty was also very observant. As they walked leisurely down the street, she too noticed that there were a great many stores of the very merchandise macaca of the Count's house. Eleanor didn't deny such an obvious fact. He only said that 30% of the buildings here were occupied by his trademark. This information surprised the girl a little, because she had seen that there were many such stores, but she could not imagine that there were so many. In the middle of the whole mass of shops, the ones that sold beautiful clothes stood out, according to the beautiful girl. But when Irina took a closer look, she noticed that all these stores looked a little strange. After all, the girl did not understand who would attach a brooch of white opal to such a suit, which was in the window of one of the stores. The girl continued. She expressed the opinion that all these buildings looked old and dreary. At that very moment, a man interrupted the beauty's musings. And then, quite unexpectedly, the young man asked her if she would like to work for him, but not as a maid in his house, but in the trade union as a partner and manager. Seeing the look on her face, the man hurriedly backpedaled, saying that of course it was all voluntary and he wasn't forcing her, and if she didn't want to do it all, she didn't have to. On the one hand, and probably on the other, it was not favourable for him to make her this offer, because he was aware that her financial situation would immediately improve if she accepted his offer, and therefore she would be able to pay off her debt. Irina didn't understand him now, why he didn't want to tell her that, knowing what her money situation was. Eleanor said that aristocrats in most cases considered and told him to his face that business was second or even lower class and not worthy of their attention. He knew that as soon as she started trading, a lot of people and old acquaintances would start looking down on her. Irina thought that it would be little different from the time when she had gone to those very friends and asked each of them to try to help her. But as you know, no one had helped her except Eleanor. Now Irina perceived everything somewhat differently, so she asked him why he spoke about his favourite and so profitable business in such a dismissive tone. The Count replied that, whatever it was, he was quite thick-skinned, unlike her, and he didn't care much about the opinion of others. But he was a little mistaken now, and the girl declared that she too had long since given a damn about other people's opinions. Irina looked intently into the man's eyes and spoke confidently about how she could help him in the business and could do all the things he could do. They were just about home. The girl was sitting in front of the mirror, and the young man was carefully combing her long, beautiful hair. And then she confessed that she had been thinking about something for quite a long time. She voiced her thought. It turned out that she had asked her former classmate for permission to work at one of the stores on Kisana Street, the one they had opened just a few days ago. Eleanor froze for a brief moment and then continued to brush her hair, but so far he had given no positive or negative response to the girl's request. The man involuntarily remembered the moment when the beautiful woman had said that she could do everything that he did. But for some reason, he didn't look as happy now as he had a moment ago. He thought for a minute and then said that he understood her desire, but perhaps instead of running the store on her own, she should start doing paperwork for the trade union. Then he continued combing again, while saying that the location of that store was not particularly good. On top of that, they are quite often practicing various sales, so that store was not a good choice. But Irina, even understanding all this, wanted to try, and it was read not only on her sign, which said that she was not in the mood to argue, but on such an occasion she would definitely do it. But by the gleam in his eyes, the man realized that the matter smelled of kerosene. So the young master exhaled and said that he was not going to forbid her to go into business. He realized that he had no idea what she was thinking, but if that was her true desire, he was not going to forbid her to realize it. But in return, he decided to ask one thing of her already. Namely, he asked her to always remember his protection. Eleanor was well aware that most likely his girlfriend thought that it was not that important to take care of her safety, but he had a different opinion on this matter. As in a dangerous situation, she should learn to think of herself first and foremost, and then about others or things. The young man knew she was proud, so he emphasized that even if she considered it an act of cowardice, she should still think of herself first and run away to avoid getting hurt. Eleanor asked Irina to always, even if it would seem shameful and dishonorable to her, to protect and save herself. Irina looked directly into the eyes of the Count and did not understand why he was so much worried about nothing, and looked so worried and serious. The girl did not understand what was going on with the young man, because he always behaved like a man who had absolutely everything and everyone under control. But lately he began to retreat in some matters. For some reason, she began to think that he was holding something inside him and not letting it out. Sometimes she began to notice that this inner conflict was reflected in the man's handsome face, because it seemed that he didn't want to do what he was doing. Nevertheless, now he squeezed her palm in his hand, leaned over and asked again if she had understood well all that he had said and asked a moment ago. Morning came, and in the manor all the servants, as always before the Earl left, ran into the courtyard to line up and see him off to work. Eleanor was lovely as always, well-groomed, a little aloof, haughty and stylishly and beautifully dressed, followed by Hans. The Count and the butler turned back sharply, as their company today lacked one more person, namely Lady Irina, who for some reason was embarrassed and hid behind the corner of the mansion and only looked at the men from her hiding place. Eleanor was about to get into the carriage, which was kindly waiting to depart along the designated route. He looked at Irina once more and asked her if she had changed her mind and was not going anywhere with him. The girl had no other choice but to leave her hiding place, to walk past the maids with whom she worked, and to wave goodbye to them. She was very much embarrassed by this situation. She was even somewhat ashamed to go to work with the Count like this. As usual, Eleanor did not pay attention to such trifles. He gave her his hand and helped her into the carriage, both of them remaining silent. The carriage moved, and the two of them drove off to meet new accomplishments and successes. At first, Irina was very tense and was silent almost the whole time they were travelling. But as soon as they started to run up to their destination, she became like a very cute, excited kitten. She started looking out the carriage window and talking about how they would be there any minute. Eleanor was both amused and saddened by this picture, but then he remembered that something was definitely missing from the girl's outfit. So he sat down next to her, going to correct her shortcoming. Carefully, he pinned the Schuberg Trade Association insignia on her clothes in a prominent place. He and she looked pleased, though a little shocked. The young man then took his seat in the carriage and spoke. He spoke again in all seriousness, saying that if there was trouble, danger, or conflict in the store, she would have to take care of her own safety first, and then everything else. The man knew that the nobles often walked this street, undercover so to speak. The coastal guards would support her as well, as long as she wore the badge of the Schuberg Trade Association. Rini said she understood, or pretended to understand, and then sincerely thanked the young man for the opportunity he had given her for self-actualization. Eleanor, on the other hand, did not share the girl's joy and anticipation. On the contrary, he looked confused, for he did not understand the reason for his irrational excitement. He didn't understand himself and his emotions. He did not understand what he was more worried about, his safety or the girl's success. And here they actually arrived. The young man opened the carriage doors and literally pushed the girl into them, who had not expected such a trick. Irina did not like such behavior of the Count to his modest person, as it was impolite of the man to interrupt their conversation in such a way. And the man was already giving orders to his men to escort the girl to the necessary store. The Count's subordinate immediately obeyed his orders and asked the lady to follow him. But Irina is not an ordinary worker. She decided to correct her impression of their farewell, and the girl went to the carriage and opened the door, then a little surprised the young gentleman. At the same second, the girl changed her anger for mercy and smiled sweetly, asking the Count what he would like to eat for dinner. The girl mouthed that if they were to have dinner together tonight, she would be sure to buy something delicious for the two of them to celebrate her new job. For this was how she wanted to repay him for the new opportunity to be someone important. So she hoped he wouldn't mind such an offer. She hoped that her feminine charms had worked on the man this time, and that he would agree to everything she had said above. This time she was 100% right, as Eleanor couldn't resist her beaming smile. Having received his consent to host a celebratory dinner, the girl ran to her new place of work and waved goodbye to the man. After this mini commotion, the Count calmed down a bit, and even smiled as he leaned his head against the cold glass of the carriage window. And so the girl stood in front of the store where she was to work from today. It was her first day on the job as a store manager, so her eyes lit up with happiness and joy at being able to try her hand at something new and exciting. As soon as the girl entered the store, she was immediately greeted by a polite female voice. A young woman in a strict dress hurried toward her and introduced herself, saying her name was Suzanne. Irina also introduced herself. The woman said that she knew who the girl was and why she was in the store, because she had heard that the trade union was planning to send a manager here. The girl admitted that things were a little different than the older lady had thought. Irina admitted that she was completely new to this business and had little understanding of what she needed to do and how she needed to do it, which is why she came here for training in the first place. Suzanne, on the other hand, recalled how a few days ago she had been warned by colleagues from other stores that the Count was personally checking the outlets.